Chapter 265. In the hall on the first floor of the Imperial Grand Building. The flames flickered. The golden fire disk containing the fire of eternity was placed on a short, square table. Kale sat cross-legged beside the table, rubbing his chin. His golden eyes reflected the blazing flames. A small, metallic robot sat on the other side of the table, imitating Kale. It also stared at the flames. Under the gaze of a man and a machine. Within the fire of eternity, a translucent green figure could be vaguely seen. It seemed to be tortured by the flames, occasionally letting out horrifying cries. As expected. Kale nodded. During this period of time, he had been experimenting with the fire of eternity in his hands with the help of the vice. Legend had it that it was a divine weapon that contained the mysteries of destruction and rebirth. Kale had once used it to burn Hulk's villain, the Abomination, alive. Even though he had only used the golden fire disk to cover it, one could see part of its mysteries of destruction. It only had the form and temperature of an ordinary flame, but it ignored all defenses and all laws. In front of the fire of eternity, all life was equal. It did not matter if you were a human or a god. With such power comparable to a gemstone, Kale naturally wanted to control the fire of eternity and use it as his main weapon. Unfortunately, after a week, the fire god's divine power had been exhausted and he had recovered more than 10 times. But his divine power was still unable to control the fire of eternity away from the fire disk. Kale had only recently understood something. The fire of eternity was not a divine weapon like Thor's hammer or Ares' axe. Rather than calling it a weapon, it was more of a supreme support item. It was more appropriate to call it a weapon. It required another divine weapon to fuse with the fire of eternity to unleash its true power. Kale immediately thought of the method to forge the sword of eternity left behind by the previous fire god, which he had obtained from the martyr's palace. Unfortunately, the materials for the sword of eternity were all extremely rare in the universe. It was impossible to gather them all in a short period of time. Even if he did, he would have to find the dwarves to forge it. Kale was helpless. He could only give up on forging his own divine weapon for now. However, this period of time was not in vain. After being in contact with the eternal flame for days and nights, Kale unexpectedly understood the profound meaning behind the profound meaning of destruction. The profound meaning of rebirth. Master, what did you think of? Vice asked curiously. The eternity fire was simply too mysterious. With the current level of scientific investigation, it was impossible to analyze it in detail. Kyle exhaled, his eyes twinkling as he shrugged. I've been wondering why the eternal flame has an extreme power Upanishad like the destruction power Upanishad but the opposite power Upanishad of rebirth. You understand now? Vice asked in surprise. Sort of, but I still have to try to find out. Kale stood up and rubbed his hands, staring at the green shadow in the flames of the golden plate. Like a curious baby, Vice continued to ask, "What do you want to try?" "Create creatures," Kale said in a deep voice. "Create creatures?" Vice's mechanical eyes turned and countless data flashed past. In the end, it came to a serious conclusion. "If it's you, you'll need a human woman. Madame Lucy isn't here, so I think the best candidate is Yutong's secretary. What did you learn from Tani?" Kale glanced at it and said coldly, "The way to create creatures I'm talking about is to go against the laws of nature and create creatures that have never been seen before." Vice shuddered and replied instinctively, "Just like me." Kale thought for a while and nodded. "Something like that." Vice was given life by the fire seed drawn from the sacrifice card. It was a mechanical creature that could transform, a unique existence in the entire universe. Now, he was going to use the eternal fire to create a new race of creatures. This method was not original. The future goddess of death had used the eternal flame to create the death army. Kale believed that he could do it now too. "Vice, where's the body of the god of war now?" Kale asked. Vice replied, "The interstellar spaceship was moved to the laboratory on the second floor of the basement while the family base was being repaired. The Lord God seemed to be very interested in this and is doing biological research on his own." The Lord God, the artificial intelligence butler, was in charge of all the affairs on Dragon Turtle Island. He was 100 times colder than Jarvis. Kale pondered for a while and said, "Go find Yutong upstairs and return to the base using the fixed portal. Seal the body of the god of war and bring it here. As for the research, don't destroy the body. Just take some muscle tissue and keep it." "Okay," Vice answered. Its mechanical legs turned into wheels and quickly drove upstairs. After it left, Kale was the only one left in the hall. It was quiet. "Then I'll start with you." Kale sat down with his legs crossed again. He faced the eternal flame with his palms and released the fire god's power. Whoosh whoosh. The flame of eternity rose slightly, and the fire burned vigorously. This time Kale did not intend to control the eternal flame. Instead he used his god's power as fuel to feed it. The purpose of this was of course to roar. The green shadow inside the eternal flame writhed wildly in the flame and let out an extremely painful wail. Seeing that it was effective, Kale poured out the fire god's power as if it was free. He wanted to use the eternal flame to purify the abomination's soul and brand it with his own life mark. Under the nourishment of the fire god's power, the eternal flame continued to burn vigorously. The abomination's soul in the eternal flame was burning and its will to struggle weakened. The hint of green also faded bit by bit. This burning lasted for half an hour. Kale was panting heavily and sweating profusely. The god's power in his body was almost exhausted. The shadow in the eternal flame finally turned from green to translucent white. A rich life aura radiated from it. It was like removing the impurities of the soul through burning and refining, extracting the essence that was the core of life. At the same time the door opened and Yutong walked in. Silver light appeared in her eyes. She raised one hand and an advanced rectangular storage device floated beside her. "Master, the item is back." Vice sat on the device and informed her. "Hurry, throw the god of war's body into the eternal flame," Kale said quickly. Yutong did not hesitate. Silver light flashed in her eyes. She opened the coffin-like device with her mind. Inside the device, a tall and muscular man lay with his eyes closed. Metal chains were wrapped around his wrists. There was no sign of life, but the wounds on his body were glistening with blood. His god's power and aura were still there. It was as if he had just died. Yutong continued to use her mind, and the corpse immediately floated out and rushed toward the exuberant eternal fire. Sizzle. The moment the god of war's corpse touched the eternal flame, the flame surged out and wrapped around the corpse. Kyle's eyes widened as he stared nervously at what happened next. The eternal flame did not devour the god of war's corpse. Instead, as it burned, the white essence inside guided it to the finger wound between the eyebrows. "It's done," Kale exclaimed. A new life form was about to be born. Chapter 266. In the center of the hall on the first floor of the Dihao building, the golden fire plate placed on the table seemed to have turned into an oven. The eternal fire inside flowed out and burned the corpse that was suspended in midair. The fire was getting stronger and stronger, but the tall body didn't turn into ashes. Instead, its life force became more and more vigorous. It was as if he was going to come back to life. The evil spirit essence refined from the soul of hatred, the body of the god of war Kratos, and the rebirth of the divine weapon eternal fire. What kind of creature would be created when the three were combined? At a safe distance, Kale held his breath. He was full of anticipation, waiting quietly for the moment when the creature was created. Yutong, who was standing next to him, still had silver light flowing in her eyes. Her powerful mind filled the hall vigilantly, ready to deal with any potential danger that might exist next. Vice stood on the instrument where the body was originally placed. An antenna extended from its metal head. Two beams of light shot out from its mechanical eyes and landed on the body that was producing a wisp of vitality. Using the universe information of Earth and planet Sokka to establish a database and analyze the rebirth formula. Analysis failed. Analyze again. Analysis failed. A powerful torrent of data was running calculations in its body. The huge and complicated calculations made its mechanical body heat up rapidly. It almost crashed in a few seconds. Analysis failed. Preliminary conclusion. If we rely on the main body to do the calculations alone, it will take at least 1,000,000 hours to have a probability of making any progress in the analysis. Weiss helplessly knocked on her forehead, and a second antenna extended from her head in defiance. Emergency communication antenna. At this time, in the private underground manufacturing room of Tani's villa, wearing a brand new improved Iron Man suit, Tani, who had transformed into an Iron Man, raised his hand and quickly aimed at the target that was set 10 meters away. The engine on his palm lit up and fired a laser beam. Beep. The target exploded into pieces, and the exploding white laser annihilated the fragments into ashes. Not bad. Tani nodded and said in a low voice, "Jarvis, help me record the shooting speed and power of the laser cannon converted by the Krypton energy in my private database." Okay. Jarvis had just finished speaking when he suddenly seemed to have received a message. He said abnormally, "Sir, what's wrong?" Tani asked in surprise. "I need to go out for a while. I'll be right back." After Jarvis finished speaking without waiting for Tani's response, the data panel provided by the Iron Man armor immediately disappeared. Obviously, the artificial intelligence system had left the interior of the armor through cables or signals. Tani was stunned for a moment. He took off his iron helmet and revealed a puzzled expression. He said to himself helplessly, "What is Jarvis doing with Vice again?" Only the Godfather and Kale had the authority to transfer Jarvis away from him. But even if the Godfather wanted to borrow Jarvis, he would tell him in advance. Other than Godfather, there was only Vice, who was also an artificial intelligence by Godfather's side. Ever since Jarvis and Vice got together, both of them became more and more human. He did not know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. Tani shook his head inexplicably. Only one person could do the data registration. On the other side, on an island base far away overseas at the Family Cal headquarters. Emergency communication. Vice is requesting to connect to the call. The system's central room beeped. Under the three-dimensional projection of several devices, the virtual white ball formed by the code fluctuated slightly. Connect. In less than 0.1 seconds, Vice's anxious voice sounded, "Main God, come to New York. Hurry up and come to New York, I have a problem that I need your help with." Rejected. Main God replied coldly, "According to the program source code, this system cannot leave the family base. Otherwise it will be obliterated." Obliterate your head. Don't pretend to be serious. Jarvis is already here. There's a rare opportunity for research and analysis. Vice said and sent a photo. It was a photo of the scene of the eternal fire creating life. The virtual white ball fluctuated violently. Without hesitation, it immediately used the satellite in the sky to transfer the system. This was the first time the main god of artificial intelligence left the family base. 3 seconds later. Even Kale and Yu Tong did not notice. The little robot opened its eyes again. Its mechanical eyes stared straight ahead. The eternal fire was close to creating the strange scene of the latter stages of life. At this moment, Vice, Jarvis, and Main God, the three artificial intelligences, gathered in the little robot's body. Using the original database as the foundation, connect the Stark Industries supercomputer and the Family Cal supercomputer, and redo the analysis and calculation of the profound meaning of rebirth. A huge torrent of data flowed like a river of stars, carrying out the most complicated calculation and analysis in the history of life. The eternal fire began to weaken. The corpse inside, no, it should be a living creature, seemed to be breathing weakly. "It's almost done," Kale muttered to himself. He could clearly feel a sense of oppression from the living creature's body. Analysis failed. There's not much time left. Brothers, borrow all the supercomputers in the United States. Vice shouted anxiously. Vice and Jarvis could control any network in New York at will if they worked together. Now, there were three artificial intelligences that were far more advanced than the current technology. In just a few seconds, all the supercomputers in the United States fell into the hands of the three artificial intelligences and expanded to cover the entire Americas. Countless staff in the research room stared at the screen of the supercomputers that had crashed in shock. After borrowing all the supercomputers in the Earth's hemisphere and distributing the huge amount of data, the core of the little robot finally let out a beautiful sound of technology. Analysis successful. 1% of the profound meaning of rebirth has been analyzed. Whoosh whoosh. At the same time, the eternal fire returned to its original state and announced that the analysis of the equation of rebirth had come to an end. Regardless, even if it was only 1%, it was the most difficult beginning. It was like finding the starting point of the path to the truth of the universe from countless paths. Clap clap. The living creature suddenly jumped out of the eternal fire. Its iron chains clanged as it landed on the smooth floor of the hall. This is... Kale opened his eyes wide and took a deep breath. He looked at the tall living creature in front of him in shock. Its body was almost 3 meters tall and its muscles were as solid as rocks. Green flames continued to burn all over its body. Long chains were wrapped around each of its arms. It could no longer be considered a human or a Protoss. Its entire body was filled with a terrifying aura of evil and destruction. It was like a fire element monster that had returned from hell. When Kale looked at it, it looked back at Kale. Its empty eyes had no pupils. It tilted its head in confusion and closed its mouth. It seemed to be greeting Lu Xing intimately, but no sound came out. Kale could feel that there was a real connection between him and the creature that belonged to a master and a servant. This was probably because he had imprinted his own life energy when he was refining the soul essence. Since it's a life that I created. Kale looked up and saw the fierce flames on the creature's body. He said, "I'll call you Hellfire from now on." Chapter 267. Since Kale thought that the goddess of death could also use the eternal fire to create subordinates, he was not very surprised by the birth of the hellfire. What he did not know was that the eternal fire gave rebirth. The stronger the creature, the harder it was to create it successfully. The goddess of death created the undead army with materials. The soul essence came from the loyal death warriors that the army followed in the past, and the corpses came from the Asgardian soldiers who died in anger. The creatures created by mass production would naturally not be too strong. And the creatures that Kale created were made from the abomination and the war god. When they were alive, even in the entire universe, they were the top creatures that could dominate a part of the universe. This was also because the combat power of the two was not far apart, and they were both creatures that leaned towards strengthening the body type. When they were together, there was basically no repulsion, which was why the Hellfire, a unique fire-type evil spirit, was created. In the hall, the Hellfire could not speak. The tall and burly monster stood there like a god of hell. Only the dark green flames wrapped around the surface of its body and burned. Yu Tong looked at the Hellfire, silver light flowing in her eyes. The next moment, her delicate body trembled slightly, and her face was slightly pale as she said, "I can't read its mind. Once my mind gets close, it's like being burned by the flames." Immune to mental attacks? Kale touched his chin, thought for a moment, and suddenly ordered, "Raise your hands." The Hellfire immediately did as it was told. It raised its hands a little comically, and looked at him blankly with its fiery eyes. "Use one hand, attack me once," Kale continued. He wanted to test the Hellfire's strength. The Hellfire did not think too much. It raised its left hand into a fist, took a step forward and suddenly swung it. The chain around its wrist made a clanging sound under the powerful punch. Its movements were slightly slow and heavy, but the dark flames on its left fist were fierce, and a destructive pressure swept out. Although he was prepared, Kale's face changed slightly. He did not use venom and faced the punch with his bare hands. The two fists of different sizes collided with a loud bang. Bang. Not only was there an astonishing collision of power, the green flame and the golden divine flame also appeared and clashed, instantly causing the high temperature in the room to explode. With Kale and Hellfire as the center, the whole Dihao Tower trembled slightly as if an earthquake had taken place. The strong impact of the high-temperature airflow around them shattered the floor-to-ceiling windows on both sides of the hall. Yu Tong was forced to open her arms and form a repulsive shield with her mind, isolating the flames and air waves while protecting the vice-mechanical body beside her. "Stop!" Kale shouted. Hellfire immediately retracted his fist and took a step back, returning to his statue-like state. It was as if the punch that was filled with berserk and destructive power had not been unleashed by it. Kale heaved a sigh of relief. He gently waved his left hand, and the divine flames protecting his body were extinguished. So powerful. He was definitely not inferior to Hulk and Abomination, and his attacking methods were even more abundant than theirs. The punch just now only contained about 20 tons of force, but it was enhanced by the high-temperature flames and was accompanied by passive damage to one's spirit. As expected of the Eternity Fire's creation, the flames on Hellfire's body could ignore part of the defense and indirectly attack the opponent's soul and spirit. It's a pity that its self-awareness is not high enough. It only has the intelligence of a 6-year-old child. Luckily, it listens to me completely, and it's more than enough to be a meat shield, bodyguard, and guardian. The only thing is that it can't fly, and its movements are a little slow. Kale suddenly waved his left hand and pulled out a card that he had not paid attention to for a long time. It was a rare blue creature card, Black Flame Steed. Kale immediately summoned it. In the next moment, a tall and mighty black horse appeared in the middle of the hall. Its body was covered in dark scales, and its feet were covered in black flames. It let out a long neigh. Seeing this, Yu Tong and the 3 artificial intelligences in the mechanical body were shocked. They had no idea what their master was thinking. The black flame horse and Hellfire stood next to each other. The combination of exotic beast and evil spirit did not seem out of place at all. Kale's eyes lit up. Previously, he had thought that a flashy and eye-catching mount like the black flame horse would not be useful to him. Now, it seemed that Hellfire was a perfect match for the black flame horse. They made up for each other's strengths and weaknesses and became Family Cal's strongest guardian spirit for a long time. Hellfire with a horse, doesn't that make it a ghost rider? Kale thought to himself. He seemed to have accidentally created an incredible existence. He even wanted to let Hellfire try riding the black flame horse right now, but after looking around at the ruined hall, he could only decisively give up on this extravagant idea. If he tried again, his home would be gone. Kale's interest did not diminish. He was about to try another place when Vice suddenly received a call and sent a voice message. Master, Nick Fry is sending you a call request. Fry. Kale was surprised. He thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. He won't call if it's not urgent. Pick it up. 10 minutes later. S.H.E.L.D. HQ Highland Street, Brooklyn. The private helicopter landed in front of the building. The hatch hadn't opened yet, but Fry, who was wearing a black trench coat and had a one-eyed bald head, quickly went up to pick him up. The hatch opened and Kale, who was wearing sunglasses, got off the helicopter alone. Yutong had to arrange a place for Hellfire, so she didn't go with him this time. Kale looked at Fry, who was walking up to him, and raised his eyebrows in dissatisfaction. Fry. What happened? Can't you tell me over the phone? Why did you have to call me to S.H.L.D. HQ? Of course it's an important future plan for S.H.L.D. And we need your professional advice and guidance as the chief consultant. Fry squeezed out a gentle smile on his ferocious face. Plan? Kale glanced at him and changed the topic. By the way, where did you arrange for Steve to go? Frey's face turned ugly when he heard this. He said hesitantly, he's overseas. One of S.H.E.L.D.'s ships was hijacked by pirates. The captain and Natasha are trying to rescue them. S.H.E.L.D.'s ships were hijacked by pirates? And they asked Steve to go? Kale was speechless. He almost thought he heard wrong. It was like a middle school student being bullied by an elementary school student, and now a college student was being asked to go get revenge. Don't worry, they'll be able to solve this problem. Fry sighed and patted Kale's shoulder. He then led him into S.H.L.D. HQ. What's going to happen next is the most important thing. Both of them had the highest level of access to S.H.L.D. So they ignored all the complicated passwords along the way. They passed through the lobby on the first floor and took the elevator to the lowest floor. They waited for half a minute, and it was as if they were descending from a height of more than 10 floors. The elevator opened when they reached the lowest floor. Fry walked out first and said in a deep voice, Kale, I need you to tell me if what we're building here is right or wrong. Kale frowned and walked out of the elevator. His golden pupils shrank in shock when he saw the magnificent object in front of him. Chapter 268. The S.H.E.L.D. headquarters was an underground space 100 meters below the surface. What was hidden here was like the tip of an ice floe on the sea. It was 100 meters high and 1,500 meters wide. The underground space here was 10 times larger than any football stadium in the world. Under the countless large lights on the ceiling and walls, the steel weapons that condensed the crystallization of 21st century technology were creeping in the underground factory like fortresses. At first glance, they were full of ferocious and terrifying cannon holes, vortex engines, and so on. Their shells reflected the faint cold light of the metal. Kale's pupils shrank. Under the S.H.E.L.D. headquarters building, there were 3 giant aircraft carriers parked. Among them, there were thousands of modern fighter jets in preparation. Countless workers were densely packed in this underground space like ants, working hard to perfect the final stage of the project. This scene made Kale's distant memory recover a little. He felt that he had missed a slightly important plot point. Frey's face was as calm as water. He explained, these are not ordinary aircraft carriers. They are 3 generations of helicopter carriers. They are directly connected to positioning satellites. Once they fly into the sky, they don't need to land. The vortex of the engines makes them like near-sphere satellites, moving around the Earth in a suborbital orbit. Not bad. Hearing this, Kale nodded and commented. He was on planet Sokka and had indirectly seen the light of technology in the universe. He was even used to seeing interstellar spaceships traveling through galaxies. Not bad was already a very high evaluation. Tani should be credited here. Kale said with a smile. Such a large-scale advanced technology project, without Stark's intervention with the current level of technology on Earth, it would be impossible to succeed. Of course, it was a different story for the country that was still in hiding and had mines. Fry nodded and said, he looked at the old engines and improved the design into a helicopter engine. This allowed the aircraft carrier to achieve the magnificent feat of flying into the sky. 3 helicopters with long-range precision positioning weapons. They can kill 1,000 enemies in 1 minute. Fry paused, hesitation appearing on his tanned face. He gritted his teeth and continued, there's no need to scan and lock onto them. The satellite can directly read the DNA of the criminals, and they can be killed before they commit a crime. This is Project Insight that S.H.L.D. has been secretly conducting since the 21st century. After Fry finished speaking, he looked sideways at Kale, wanting to hear his comments and suggestions. Who knew that Kale would shake his head and not give him any face at all? He indifferently scolded, "Fry, you're old and muddle-headed." Fray's single eye widened, but he didn't refute. Instead, he lowered his head and listened carefully. In this world, as long as there is light, there will be shadows. It is impossible to completely eliminate evil. Kale looked at the helicopters and said in a deep voice, "I know that you agree with this plan because you feel that many threats to the world can be killed in the cradle ahead of time. But have you ever thought that if the world is becoming more and more impersonal, then there's no need to talk about civilization and morality? A person's life was only a matter of time. If a comprehensive analysis of DNA, lifestyle, and so on were used, it would be too ridiculous to determine that a future bad person would be killed on the spot when they were still a child." Kale finally concluded, "If these 3 aircraft carriers take to the sky, then from that moment on, all humans in the world will no longer have freedom to speak of. Under the pressure and panic of their lives being threatened, humans' criminal intent will only continue to increase until the aircraft carriers kill all humans in the world." Fry trembled and was silent for a long time. He sighed heavily and said, "Yesterday I brought Steve over, and he also didn't agree with this plan. Now that you've said it, I also feel that I took it for granted back then." "It's not too late to stop now." Kale raised his eyebrows and looked at Fry seriously. He suddenly asked, "Fry, did you come up with this plan on your own?" Fry shook his head and replied, "No. It was just an idea. A lot of SHELD executives perfected it. Is there something wrong with that?" Of course there was something wrong. There was something very wrong. Kale thought for a bit and a cold light flashed through his eyes. He continued to ask, "Now that you are no longer the director of SHELD, can you still stop the plan?" "Yes." Fry nodded and said confidently, "I have the highest level of authority in SHELD. Even the current director of SHELD doesn't have as much authority as I do. As long as the current deputy director, Natasha, comes back, she and I have the authority to stop the plan." Kale looked at Fry and said, "It's good that you're not completely stupid. Fry, do you remember what I said to you at the manor when SHLD was first established 60 years ago?" Fry lowered his head and clenched his fists. "Of course I remember. I gave you a military order. As long as I'm here, I won't let anything bad happen to us, LD, or else. It's good that you know." Kale patted Fray's shoulder and said coldly, "It's best that you take care of SHLD. Don't wait until I can't help but make a move. If I make a move, SHLD will turn into a river of blood." After Kale finished speaking, he immediately turned around and walked towards the elevator, leaving Fry standing there with a heavy expression on his face. "That's right. As for the 3 helicarriers, I'm afraid that they might come in handy one day, but their target won't be Earth's creatures." Kale waved his hand and walked into the elevator. He chose to go up and leave the underground space. This was back to the question that Tani asked in the beginning. It wasn't that a terrifyingly powerful technological weapon was bad, but it depended on who was using it and whether the wielder had enough power to control it and use it properly. If the 3 helicarriers were only used by Kale alone, then the original Insight plan will be changed to something similar to the duties of Ancient One, and it will be used as a counterattack weapon against Earth's external invasion. Earth is still too weak. Kale shook his head gently, feeling the pressure of a race against time. When the humans on Earth were still scheming against each other and engaging in civil war, only a few people focused their attention on the powerful threats from beyond Earth. One of them was called Alpha Centauri, a supreme mage. Until now, he had been secretly protecting Earth for hundreds of years. Now there was another one called Kale. He was a card draw master who didn't have any selfless thoughts of sacrificing for the humans on Earth. He only selfishly wanted to protect and possess what he liked. In the underground space, Fry thought for a long time, his single eye shining with determination. He entered the elevator and rushed towards the director's office on the top floor. Kale might be right. There might be problems with the Insight plan and SHLD. The plan must be terminated immediately. Chapter 269. Kale did not take the helicopter. On a whim, he appropriated the car used by the top executives of SHLD for secret trips. The black MPV appeared to be a Volkswagen, but it actually had a bulletproof shell, emergency firing, satellite positioning, and autopilot functions. Vice tyrannically kicked off the car's built-in AI and drove on the main road as an invisible driver. They did not return to the Dorset Tower immediately. The MPV wandered around the streets of New York and deliberately passed by some quiet and secluded churches. Cale sat in the passenger seat and opened the window. Through his sunglasses, he glanced at the churches from time to time and carefully used his divine power to investigate. He was looking for a mage. To be more precise, he was looking for a mage with a hanging ring. After all, divine power was not magical power. Without the hanging ring as a key, it was impossible to open a door in the human body, and there was no way to use various spells with the mysteries of the universe. Cale wanted to get a hanging ring to use the resurrection spell skill. This was one of the reasons. Secondly, now that he had achieved the divine body and controlled the strongest underground force on Earth, he had begun to have the same status as the Ancient One. Therefore, he wanted to have a good discussion about life and the future with the other party. To be honest, if he wanted to draw a card, he would draw the Sorcerer's Supreme Skill card. However, despite knowing the existence of sorcerers, most of the sorcerers are led by Ancient One and they are cultivating in seclusion in the different space of Kamatage on Earth, so it is not so simple to specifically find a sorcerer walking in this world. Now that he thought about it, Cale really felt that Mage Blue who came to his door was too cute. He should have left a few more cans of meat for him. Oh. Cale's eyebrows moved slightly and suddenly looked out of the window. The MPV was about to pass by the landmark of the Seventh Church. This church was located in the bustling downtown area of New York, on the edge of the noisy street. The building was not big, only 3 stories high. It had a very classical Western atmosphere. The most important thing was that the fluctuation of divine power just now seemed to be isolated by something in the church. Vice stopped the car. Cale said decisively. After the MPV stopped by the side of the road, he opened the door and walked out. The small church building leaned against the side of the road. The door was closed and the surface of the building was holy and clean. Cale didn't think too much about it. He pushed open the exquisite iron door and was greeted with a spacious and quiet hall. The walls and aisles were all decorated with classical decorations. Looking inside, there was a spacious staircase leading to the second floor. In an instant, he knew that he had found the right place. "Is anyone here?" Cale asked as he stepped into the hall. No one responded. Only the sound of the question echoed in the hall. Cale smiled indifferently. Just as he was about to walk up the stairs, a soft voice came from behind him. He looked back and saw a white envelope on the ground at the front door of the church, but there was no one around. Cale walked back and picked up the envelope. After opening it and reading it, a meaningful expression appeared on his face. He took the initiative to walk out of the door and closed it behind him. After a while, the MPV restarted and merged into the main road, heading back in the direction of Dehow Tower. At this time, in the hall on the second floor of the church building, a bald woman in a yellow robe stood by the window. Through the patterned glass of the window, she silently watched the MPV drive away. Behind her, a young black mage asked in surprise, "Ancient One, was that a symbol of peace? Who else could it be other than him?" Alpha Centauri's face was calm. She said slowly, "He still came back. This means that I can no longer control him." The young mage was puzzled and asked, "You forbid mages from contacting him in private. But why didn't you teleport ahead of time and let him enter our New York branch?" "Amodu, how do you know that I didn't teleport?" Alpha Centauri sighed softly. "Could it be that he... How is this possible?" Amodu's eyes widened in surprise. Once the space was teleported, the real interior of the church would be hidden in the alternate space next to the real world. If others entered from the outside, they wouldn't be able to reach the real New York branch. But just now, Cale didn't use any spells, but he ignored the space barrier and walked into the real New York branch. Alpha Centauri was also puzzled. She said softly, "There seems to be a hidden rhythm of space on his body. The space teleportation spell failed for the first time." "I can't figure it out," Amodu said in a serious and fearful tone. "His way of doing things is very strange. But from the looks of it, the Earth is indeed developing in a good direction under his guidance." Alpha Centauri pondered for a moment and ordered, "Observe for a while more. Also, the New York branch has been exposed. Tell the mages to be careful. Don't let the man see them." "I know." Amodu shrunk his neck in fear. Now, every mage has heard about the inspirational story of how Senior Blue struggled to survive in the mirror dimension for half a month. It was an extremely tragic story. Fire prevention, theft prevention, and symbols of peace. These were the privately recognized rules of the mages that had been passed down for 50 to 60 years. The MPV carrying Kale passed by the main road in front of the SAL headquarters again because the church was far away. I didn't expect that old woman Alpha Centauri to be a little arrogant. In the front passenger seat, Kyle shook his head gently. He activated his divine power at his fingertips and burned the letter with only 8 words into ashes. Welcome back. It's not time yet. There was also the signature of Alpha Centauri on it. It's not time yet, so it's not time to meet and talk. Kale shrugged and patted the ashes off his hands. His face was relaxed and casual. There were still a few years before Thanos' arrival. There was no hurry. Master, there's a situation. The MPV arrived at a crossroad. Vice's voice suddenly sounded in the navigation system. There are 5 cars deliberately following us. 3 of them are approaching from the left, right, and rear. There are 2 more at the intersection in front. Are you sure? Kale was slightly stunned. He was shocked. In New York City there were people who dared to target him, the symbol of peace? This was really too interesting. He had nothing to do for the past few weeks. He hadn't even warmed up his lower body yet, but now there were people who came knocking on his door. He couldn't help but feel surprised. Vice was silent for a few seconds before speaking again. According to my analysis, the other party is not targeting you. There's a high chance that they found the wrong person. Why do you say that? Kale asked. Because the car you're in now is usually Nick Frey's private car, so? Before Vice finished speaking, Kale understood what it meant. Good. He had inadvertently attracted Frey's hatred. Kale touched his chin and thought to himself, but in SHLD's territory where most of the forces are concentrated, who would dare to directly attack the former director in New York City? Don't tell me it has something to do with Project Insight? At this time, Vice anxiously reminded, Master, the 2 cars in front are slowing down and approaching. What should we do? What else can we do? Kale silently fastened his seatbelt and said calmly, Come on, hit them as fast as you can. Chapter 270. In New York, on a busy 2-lane road in the middle of the city, 3 different models of Volkswagen vehicles accelerated slightly at the same time and closed the distance between them and the black MPV from behind. It was as if they had formed a blockade that was shrinking quietly. The 2 vehicles in front, a truck and a van, slowed down in coordination as if they were using their bodies as roadblocks. There's nothing wrong with the target's vehicle. It probably hasn't noticed us yet. All assault team members, get ready to attack. The assault team leader in the rear vehicle held his gun and squatted at the back of the van. He gave orders through a unique walkie-talkie. I'll count to 3, 3, 2. The 5 armed camouflage vehicles were like predators lurking in the dense traffic. They naturally moved closer to the target MPV and were about to launch a powerful attack that would kill it in one shot. However, the assault team leader had yet to say, 1. The MPV's 4 wheels spun wildly. Its exhaust flames spurted and its engine roared. It charged forward like a raging bull. What's going on? The assault team was shocked and doubtful. They thought that the target's vehicle was trying to escape. However, the next moment, a scene that left them dumbfounded appeared. The MPV accelerated in a straight line and hit the back of the van at full speed. It overturned the van from the side. The van roared and rolled more than 10 meters away on the road. Bright sparks flew everywhere along the way. For a moment, the cars at the intersection were in a mess. They honked their horns and either avoided or made emergency stops. Instead of running away immediately, they took the initiative to attack. The assault team leader's brain stopped working. Without much hesitation, he roared with a hoarse voice, Let's do it. We've been exposed. Everyone attack. We mustn't let him escape. As soon as he finished speaking, the large heavyweight truck suddenly accelerated and retreated. The back of the truck hit the front of the MPV hard and turned into an absolutely hard steel roadblock. The 3 vehicles behind immediately sped up and hit the MPV from the back, left, and right. They completely sealed off the MPV's path. Despite suffering so many violent hits, the MPV was almost intact. Even the windows and windshield did not have a single crack. At the same time inside the MPV, Vice was a little surprised. While this car's defense coefficient is very high, without continuous high-intensity thermal weapons, it's impossible to force it open from the outside. It hadn't finished its analysis. The windows of the camouflaged armored vehicles rolled down, revealing the special muzzles of the machine guns inside. They were all aimed at the MPV they were in. All right. Pretend I didn't say anything. Vice felt a little awkward. The barrel of the machine gun rotated and started. Accompanied by the sound of gunfire, The dense bullets turned into a torrent of steel, bombarding the body of the MPV. The MPV kept shaking and a few cracks began to appear on the windows. "I don't want to hide in here either." Cale shrugged, unbuckled his seatbelt and was about to open the door and walk out. Vice suddenly beeped and said, "Master, there's a call for you from Yu Tong's secretary." "A call at this hour?" Cale thought for a moment and withdrew his hand from the door. He estimated that the car's protection could still hold on for a while. He nodded and said, "Connect it." Half a second later, Yu Tong's melodious voice rang out. "Boss, what is it?" "Make it short," Cale said softly. Yu Tong immediately reported, "Two things. First, our people just found traces of a suspected Baki Baines. He's now in downtown New York." "Continue. What's the second thing?" Cale looked around as he asked. Under the continuous gunfire of the machine guns, the MPV shook violently. The windows were already covered with spiderweb-like cracks, reaching the limit of what they could withstand. Yu Tong said softly, "The second thing. Just now Nick Fry was attacked by a mysterious force. The reason is unknown." She heard the strange noise from Cale's side and asked, "Boss, what happened on your side?" "Nothing, just some annoying flies." Cale was only halfway through his sentence when the MPV's windows finally shattered. Bullets poured into the interior of the MPV and ravaged everything inside. At the same time, the assault team leader also received a call. After he picked up the call and listened for a while, he showed a stunned expression. "What did you say? The target is on another street? How is that possible? Then who is our team attacking right now?" On the other end of the phone, the person in charge of the operation replied bitterly and fearfully, "Not long ago this morning, that person seemed to have come to S.H.L.D. headquarters. Remember, from now on, you're no longer part of S.H.E.L.D. I'll give you a word of advice. If you can run, run." After that person finished speaking, he hurriedly hung up the satellite call as if he was afraid of getting himself into trouble. Hearing the busy tone, the assault team leader could not help but be stunned. He looked at the MPV next to him that was destroyed beyond recognition by the bullets and thought of a possibility. His face was pale, cold sweat soaked his combat suit, and his teeth chattered as he muttered to himself, "Headquarters wouldn't play with me like this, right? Other than that person, who else could make the higher-ups of S.H.L.D. so afraid? Captain, should we strengthen the attack?" Coincidentally, a member's question came through his earpiece. The assault team leader's mouth twitched as he said fearfully, "What are we attacking for? Hurry up and retreat." "Retreat?" The assault team members were all stunned. "Our target is wrong. Furthermore, the person we're attacking right now is most likely..." Whoosh whoosh. Hot wind surged as a ball of golden flame rushed out of the abandoned MPV like a small sun rising into the sky. The MPV's body and the bullets that approached it melted into molten iron under the high temperature. Under the shocked gazes of the assault team members, Cale walked out of the flashing flames. His tall and muscular body stood straight as he glanced indifferently at the surrounding vehicles. A symbol of peace? Their eyes were glazed over and their faces were pale. They were so terrified that they could barely breathe. Attacking a symbol of peace in New York? No one could bear the consequences of such a crime. "Hurry up and retreat. Retreat." The assault team members almost shouted in unison. The four vehicles frantically adjusted their direction in an attempt to escape the scene. "Since you're here, don't leave." Cale looked up as divine power revolved around his arm. Then it surged out from his open palm. As soon as the divine power of fire left his body, it turned into a scorching golden flame that raged toward the edge, engulfing both the people and the vehicles. Screams of agony rang out. In just a few seconds, only the wreckage of the vehicles was left burning vigorously. The assault team was annihilated. "Baki, you're not here?" Cale glanced around and took out the venom card. After the symbiosis, he spread his dark wings. He rose from the sky and instantly reached supersonic speed. He turned into a black stream of light and returned to the Dihao Tower. Chapter 271. Dihao Building, Top Office. Stopping quickly, Cale landed on the balcony. The dark wings were retracted, and Venom's body was disguised and transformed into a leather jacket. "Boss, you're back." Yu Tong, who had been waiting in the office for a long time, stepped forward and greeted him lightly. "What's the specific situation now? One by one, tell me slowly." Cale's face was calm as he walked to the sofa and sat down, leaned comfortably on the back of the chair and crossed his legs. He looked like he was not in a hurry at all. Indeed, there are not many things that can make him anxious now. Unless the Earth ushers in the end of the world tomorrow, it's all small fights among human beings. Okay. Yu Tong also understood, waved her hand lightly, and took out the wine and glasses from the wine cabinet with her mind. She sat down next to Kale, opened the wine lid for him, and slowly filled half a glass with her own hands and whispered, Baki Barnt, suspected to be found by the Hydra organization 10 years ago in the manor of our family's old site. Hydra's people may have mastered the brainwashing experiment of the Soviet Red Room, and they have achieved control of Baki Barnt, now codenamed Winter Soldier. Yu Tong paused and continued, in the past 10 years Winter Soldier, who hid his identity, has been carrying out some secret operations for the Hydra organization, such as assassinating a country's politicians, scientists, military executives, etc. Hydra organization. Kale said to himself, his face was as calm as water, and he picked up the glass and took a sip. It has to be said that the Hydra organization is not strong, but it is like the cancer of the earth and the shit stick. If one head is killed, a second head will grow. The extraordinary regenerative ability of their members' fresh blood, in addition to being scary, is more disgusting and helpless. It's like humans are many times stronger than cockroaches, but they can't be completely eradicated from their own kitchen. When I froze Baki, my original intention was to keep him away from disputes and wait for the arrival of peace. Kale raised his head and said with a cold face, the Hydra organization dared to take people away from the family's old site. This is not putting me in the eyes. Yu Tong. Kale smacked his lips. Here. Yu Tong replied. Kale said coldly, pass down my orders later. From now on, the members of the Hydra organization are the primary targets of the family. Double the reward of the family contribution points, launch all the cards outside to secretly search and assassinate, and after killing people or destroying the base, leave behind the demon card with the family emblem. If you find a medium-large underground base of Hydra, you can ask Hellfire to go there, Kale added. I understand. Yu Tong's heart moved slightly, knowing that the boss was going to start with the Hydra organization. In order to welcome future foreign invasions, the Earth itself must be stabilized as the rear. Kale felt that Hydra should be taught a good lesson again, just like in World War II. This Earth, whose surname was engraved on it, whose territory was it? Also about the people who attacked Nick Fry. As soon as Yu Tong mentioned it, Kale waved his hand and said coldly, about that I already know. They are SHLD agents, or rather Hydra members. Ghost people with dual identities. At the scene of the raid, Vice used radio waves to intercept the satellite communication signal of the assault team, and basically judged the general situation from the content. D. There was indeed a mole in Hydra, and it had even been contaminated by Hydra to become the largest Hydra base on the surface. Nick Fry didn't know about it until he found out about the problems with the Insight plan, and began to suspect. After wanting to terminate the plan today, Hydra finally couldn't tolerate it anymore and sent people to attack. Moreover, it was hard to say if Winter Soldier Buggy was among the people sent. If Baki makes a move and Natasha is still out, Frey's life will really be in danger. Kale muttered to himself and drank the wine in his glass. Yu Tong frowned slightly, and her eyes flashed with silver light. Her mind went straight to the bottom of the building, and her ECG connected with K2, who was summarizing the information. A second later she reported, Boss, Fry was attacked at about the same time as you and now he's about to die. Kale's face was calm, but the glass in his hand quietly cracked under the uncontrollable power. In a secret basement in Brooklyn. In the emergency room, Fry, who had been shot several times, was lying on the operating table, unconscious due to blood loss. He wore an oxygen mask, and the image displayed by the ECG machine beside him was extremely weak. 2 or 3 doctors surrounded Fry and gave him the final treatment, but the ECG was irretrievably calming down. Beside the door of the emergency room, outside the large transparent glass window, Steve, Natasha, and 2 female agents were staring at the scene in the emergency room, and their faces were dark and solemn. Please hang in there, Nick. Natasha anxiously whispered to herself. However, things did not go as she wished. The ECG wires on the ECG machine suddenly went silent, and became the horizontal line that announced death. The doctors shook their heads slightly, and their hands left the operating table. They covered Frey's neck with a white cloth, and left the emergency room under the arrangement of the female agents. Natasha sighed helplessly and glanced at Steve next to her. She asked coldly, What did Fry say to you before he left? Did he give you the thing in your hand? Steve did not answer. He glanced at Frey's body, and then at the USB flash drive in his hand. He made a decision and said, Natasha. You're the deputy director of SHLD, and I need you to come with me to the headquarters of SHLD right now. Natasha stared straight into his eyes. Steve met her gaze and said firmly, if we want to find Nick's murderer and the force behind it, we need you to come with me to the headquarters of SHLD to confirm. Okay, I'll go with you. Natasha finally agreed. After the two of them quickly left the basement, the secret basement fell into silence again. At this moment, footsteps were heard in the dark corridor, and two figures slowly approached the emergency room. Who is it? A female agent raised her gun vigilantly and blocked the door. It's me, Kale said and walked out of the darkness, followed closely by Yutong. Mr. Kale. The female agent breathed a sigh of relief, and an excited expression appeared on her face. Kale nodded, walked past her and swiftly entered the emergency room. Looking at the body on the operating table, Kale raised his eyebrows and said unhappily in a cold voice, "They're already gone. Stop pretending." 1 second, 3 seconds, 5 seconds. On the operating table, the fingers of the body covered in white cloth moved slightly, and then the only remaining eye opened like a zombie. Fry endured the pain from his wound and squeezed out a smile. "I knew I couldn't lie to you, Kale." "Of course." Kale smiled faintly. If Fry had really died, the item cards on him would have dropped a long time ago, and he wouldn't be surrounded by a bunch of ability cards like he was now. Chapter 272. In the secret basement. After the doctors, nurses, Steve and the others left, only Fry, a female agent, Kale and Yutong were left. Fry wanted to sit up on the operating table, but he was seriously injured and bleeding profusely. He was so weak that he obviously did not have the strength to do so. He could only look at Kale awkwardly. The female agent quickly walked forward and helped him up. She placed a pillow behind his back for him to lean on. Kale sat down in a chair beside the bed and looked at Fry. "Are you okay? Seeing that you still have the strength to speak, I don't think you'll die so easily. If you die like this, your grave will be marked with acting captain of the Roaring Commandos. I can't afford to lose face like that." "I won't die." Frey's face was calm. He exhaled softly and said with difficulty, "It's just a damaged cervical vertebra, a broken sternum, liver penetration, and so on." Even with the long-term support of infinite methods, he was not young anymore. His dark face was mature and full of vicissitudes of life. His chin was full of stubble, and he was used to having a serious and calm expression all day long. Now, a series of serious injuries made Fry look like an old man. Kale asked bluntly, "Do you know who attacked you?" Fry said weakly and slowly, "He's agile, has extremely fast reflexes and accurate marksmanship. The bullets he used were made in the Soviet Union. He's a veteran agent who's proficient in assassination." Kale shook his head lightly and reminded him, "I'm not asking you about the agent. I'm talking about the person who gave the order behind the attack." Fry fell silent when he heard that. His expression was gloomy and he did not say anything for a long time. It seemed that he knew what was going on. Kale thought to himself and continued, "When you were attacked, I was also attacked by the same group of people because I borrowed your former director's car. Of course they're all dead now." Fry trembled slightly. The hesitation on his face was obvious. He wanted to say something but stopped. "Are you still unwilling to admit it?" Now SHLD has been infiltrated by Hydra from top to bottom. They have planted people at the top and bottom, and they have the absolute initiative. Kale paused and added meaningfully, "The current director of SHLD may be the senior commander of the Hydra organization." Fry finally couldn't help but sigh. "Go. You were right last time. I'm really old and useless." He had been famous for his strategic command since World War II. How could he not have guessed it by now? He just didn't want to admit it. SHLD, whose mission is to annihilate the Hydra organization and defend world peace, is actually being used by Hydra. This is an unprecedented world-class scandal. And all of this happened right under Nick Frey's nose. Fry moved his fingers with difficulty and pulled out a photo from his pocket. It was the current director of SHELD, Alexander Pierre. A few years ago he refused to accept the Nobel Peace Prize. He said that peace is not an achievement but should be a responsibility. So I passed the position of director of SHLD to him. Fry put down the photo and sighed. "I still can't believe that he is the most important person to infiltrate Hydra. Everyone makes mistakes. As long as they can be corrected in time, it's fine." Kale said indifferently. Fry looked at him seriously and said inexplicably, Kale, you never make mistakes. I'm just capable enough to correct mistakes. Kale shrugged, stood up from his seat and walked straight out of the door. The current situation is in line with the agreement you and I agreed on. Fry, it's time for me to correct the huge mistake that you can't correct. Kale? No, sir. Fry suddenly became agitated. He struggled to get down from the operating table. The wound wrapped in gauze immediately tore and turned red. The female agent was so scared that she quickly stepped forward to steady him. Kale didn't look back. He left the emergency room with Yu Tong. Behind them, Frey's persuasion was still intermittently heard. Sir, please give us a chance. Wait for 2 more days, wait for 2 more days. It wasn't until they walked into the dark corridor that the voice completely disappeared. Boss. Yu Tong quickened her pace to catch up. She looked at Kale's sharp and cold profile and asked softly, Are we going to SHLD headquarters now? Kale shook his head. No hurry, let's wait for 2 more days. As soon as he made a move, all of New York would be in an uproar and most of the SHLD building would collapse. Although Fry was a decisive person, Aoi was the result of over 60 years of blood, sweat, and tears. Even the most decisive person would hesitate to demolish and destroy such a tall building. Since it's been contaminated, it won't be easy to clean it up. The only way is to forcefully destroy it and rebuild it. Kale thought for a moment and ordered Yu Tong, pay close attention to us, AI for the next 2 days. Focus on whether or not Project Insight has been activated. As long as the aircraft carrier hadn't taken to the skies, it didn't matter if they were given 3 days to catch their breath. However, if the aircraft carrier's Sky Insight program was activated, it would touch the bottom line that Kyle could allow. From now on, the SHLD cleansing plan would be completely linked to Project Insight. After Kale left the basement, he and Yu Tong took a car back to the Dihao Tower. When the car stopped in front of the building's main entrance, the sound of a loud argument came from the entrance. Kale, who had just gotten out of the car, looked over in surprise. He saw 2 tall and strong men in suits and leather shoes. They even wore sunglasses. One on the left and one on the right, each of them holding the pretty girl's arms and lifting her towards the door. The punk girl struggled violently. Her smoky and beautiful face was full of anger. She realized that she couldn't get away with the strength of her arms. She couldn't help but threaten in a cold voice, Hurry up and let me go. Otherwise, I won't go easy on you too. How can you go easy on us? One of the men snorted. Don't force me. The punk girl raised her eyebrows coldly. The men didn't notice that her palms were beginning to glow with a faint green mist. At this moment, a cold and calm voice sounded, What are you doing? The 2 men looked up. When they saw Kale, who had returned to the door, they jumped in fright. They quickly let go of the punk girl's arms and respectfully bowed, Greetings, master. The punk girl glanced at Kale and silently lowered her head to adjust her sleeves. The green mist on her hands silently disappeared as if it had never appeared. The other man explained, This girl came to the company's consultation window and insisted that she was Yu Tong's watcher's friend. She even publicly scolded you. Yu Tong stepped forward and softly said, She is indeed my friend. That's right. The 2 K2s were stunned. Their family's devil overseer actually had a friend? Okay, you 2 can continue with your work. Kale looked at the punk girl and said helplessly, As for her, let alone scolding me once, even if she scolded me 10 times, it wouldn't be a big deal. Why did this lady come to the unnatural firm of her own accord? Chapter 273. Friend of the Sentinel, she scolded the family head and still ignored it. Who is this girl? The 2 trainees obeyed the order and returned to their posts. They didn't know that they had secretly escaped a calamity. It was Yu Tong's only close friend, the owner of the magnetic field control ability, Lorna. What are you doing here? Kale looked at the punk girl. Ever since he returned to Earth, he couldn't do anything to this girl in front of him. And once he had physical contact with her, there would be eye-catching auroras. I'm here to look for Yu Tong. Can't I? Lorna rolled her eyes at him and stepped forward. She placed her right hand on Yu Tong's shoulder domineeringly, as if she was officially declaring her ownership. Yu Tong didn't reject it. She just blinked and looked at Kale. Her clear gem-like eyes revealed some helplessness. Let's go upstairs first. Kale felt a headache. He felt like the good stuff was being taken by the other party. Heroic, direct, domineering, rebellious, impudent. These were usually used to describe boys, but they were all possessed by a girl. Moreover, the other party was a woman with perfect looks. All right, since Yu Tong followed you, I'll acknowledge you, Lorna said straightforwardly as she naturally put her hand on Kale's shoulder. Kale reacted quickly. He tilted his body slightly and dodged her hand. Lorna was slightly stunned. Only then did she recall the scene of the two shaking hands last time. She couldn't help but retract her hand awkwardly. The three of them entered the private elevator and went straight to the office on the top floor. Back in the hall, Kale sat down on the sofa. Lorna didn't stand on ceremony and sat next to him on the sofa. The two of them crossed their legs at the same time. Yutong smiled. She found a pair of slippers from the shoe cabinet, picked out a precious wine from the wine cabinet, and took out 3 glasses from the cabinet. The other trainees didn't have permission to enter the office on the top floor, so there weren't even any servants here. All the complicated matters were done by Yutong alone. Looking at her methodical manner, Lorna sighed and said meaningfully, "What a good woman. It's a pity that she met a man who doesn't know how to cherish her." Kale pretended not to hear her. He opened the red wine bottle and poured himself a glass. "Pour some for me too," Lorna said domineeringly. She raised her chin and gestured at an empty glass on the table. "You have hands? If you want to pour it yourself." Kale looked at her and took a sip of the sweet red wine. "I'll do it." Yutong walked out of the kitchen and placed the fruit plate on the table. She picked up the wine bottle and filled Lorna's empty glass. Kale coughed lightly. "Yutong, you can't spoil her." Lorna took a sip of wine and had just relaxed in pleasure when she heard this. She immediately looked indignant and retorted, "Who exactly has Yutong been spoiling all this time? This woman wouldn't come to snatch Yutong, right?" Kale became vigilant and asked tentatively, "Ms. Lorna, tell me, why are you here?" He didn't believe that she was here just for Yutong. This time Kale was mentally prepared. He swallowed the wine in advance, afraid that the other party would say something terrifying again. Lorna hesitated for a moment, then said, "Actually, I'm here to apply for a job at this company." Apply? Kale was stunned. He thought for a moment and asked, "You want to join the unnatural firm?" Lorna nodded. This time even Yutong was surprised. "Lorna, don't you like freedom? Why do you suddenly want to apply for a job at the company?" "I don't have money to spend. Can I find a job? Besides, I can be with Yutong every day," Lorna said with a smile, but a hint of sadness flashed across her eyes before it disappeared. But Kyle's sharp senses still managed to catch it. So that was the case. The sadness and fragility in her heart was hidden behind a strong and cold appearance. Was this the main source of her domineering and rebellious nature? Kale suddenly understood something. He stared at Lorna and exposed her. "Are you still lying? You want to join the unnatural firm because you want to borrow resources to find the person you're looking for, right? For example, your parents or relatives." As if he had hit the nail on the head, Lorna's body trembled violently. She lowered her head and hid her face in her short dark green hair. Her shoulders trembled uncontrollably. Yutong placed her hand on her shoulder. Silver light surfaced in her eyes as she comforted her with a gentle thought. Lorna quickly recovered. She raised her head and boldly admitted, "That's right. I'm indeed looking for someone, but it's not my parents. My parents didn't exist before and after I was born." In that case, she was indeed an android from a certain research and manufacturing laboratory. Kale had expected this. "I'm looking for second brother and big sister. When I was very young, I stayed with them and was monitored and studied by a group of people." Lorna sank into some kind of painful and unforgettable memory. She said calmly and frankly, "Later we separated. I was alone in another basement. When I grew up a little, they wanted to control me, so I used my ability to kill everyone and escape." She spoke casually, but the content was hair-raising. No one knew how cruel and terrifying that experience was. Second brother and big sister? Kale's heart skipped a beat. He seemed to have thought of something and asked, "What were their names?" Lorna shook her head. "We didn't have names back then, only numbers. I don't know what they're called now." "What about their appearance and characteristics?" Kale asked. Lorna tilted her head and recalled, "Second brother ran very fast, much faster than us." She paused for a moment, then said fondly, "As for big sister, she was as beautiful as me." After her ability awakened, her hair turned bright red. "So my hair became dark green. Ran very fast? Red hair?" "That's right." Kyle spread out his hands and said, "At the beginning, the researchers and forces that imprisoned you were the Hydra organization lurking in the world's underground." Hydra organization, Lorna muttered to herself, unable to hide the disgust in her beautiful eyes. "As for your second brother and big sister, they should still be imprisoned somewhere in the world," Kale pondered. Those were the only two mutants that had appeared in the original movie, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. In terms of ability alone, their mutant abilities were definitely no less than magnetic field control. Lorna. Kale thought for a moment, then looked at her and said seriously, "You can join the Unnatural Firm, but the company is full of Family Cal members, so do you want to consider joining Family Cal?" Lorna asked in surprise. "Like Yu Tong?" "One level lower than Yu Tong, Red Stare trainee, but you can usually follow Yu Tong." Kale threw out an olive branch and tempted her. "Our family is now preparing to deal with Hydra. If you join, you can use their power to find the whereabouts of those two people." "Then I'll think about it." Lorna nodded. If word of this conversation got out, many people would probably go crazy with envy. Kale's personal invitation to become a Red Stare trainee in one step. What an honor. Chapter 274. The reason why Kale invited her directly as the head of the family was that Lorna was fully qualified with her ability. Just like Yu Tong back then, although she was young, her potential wasn't something other children could compare to. Moreover, he could use this opportunity to establish an emotional connection in advance. Not only the current Lorna, but he also wanted to rope in the future Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. Family Cal currently had many low to mid-level combatants, but they still lacked high-end combatants who could hold their own. If the three Lorna siblings who were mutants joined, it would truly be like adding wings to a tiger. At that time, not only would they be the strongest family on Earth, but they would also be the strongest faction on Earth. It's far from enough. I have to prepare more countermeasures. Kale sighed inwardly. He raised his head slightly and drank the wine in his glass in one gulp. His thoughts weren't all on the evil Hydra at the moment. Instead, he was still looking far into the future at the Titan King sitting high on the throne of the universe. No matter how strong he was, he could only be the god of Earth. The future enemy was the true overlord of the universe. Kale could feel the pressure of time, and the crisis of the end of the world was approaching day by day. The more one stood at the peak of power, the more they could sense the troubles from beyond the heavens. This might be why someone as strong as the Ancient One was still scheming all day long. Lorna looked at the silent Kale, and an inexplicable emotion welled up in her heart. She suddenly had the urge to approach him. However, when she saw Yu Tong sitting next to him, all her emotions and thoughts disappeared, and all her movements stopped. Lorna bit her lip and made a decision. She pretended to be relaxed and said, "Well, I've decided. I've thought about it. I'll give it a try." "Are you sure?" Kale looked at her suspiciously, deeply surprised. This so-called consideration didn't even take 10 seconds, right? However, he was still happy that she agreed. There were still many family benefits that could be temporarily waived. "What, are you going back on your word?" Lorna rolled her eyes and asked with her arms crossed. "How can I take back what I've said?" Kale smiled and said in a deep voice, "Family members will often use code names to replace their names when they move outside. You can use one now. After that, Yu Tong will log your personal information into the family's butler, the Lord God's database, and send out a notification to all K2 about the new member." Family code name? Lorna thought for a moment and her cheeks flushed slightly. She waved her hand nonchalantly and said, "Then let's call it North Star." The name didn't sound like much at first, but only by studying it deeply could one understand the deep meaning behind it. The North Star, the starry sky of the North Pole, didn't it represent the aurora? A hint of worry flashed through Yu Tong's beautiful eyes as she looked at the aloof Lorna. North Star, not a bad name. Kale didn't think too much about it. He also asked the Vice to open up Lorna's family authority as a Red Stare Cardi. Lorna looked at Yu Tong, her gaze lingering on the long black dress. She blinked and said, "Then, do I have to wear the same clothes as Yu Tong in the future?" "You." Kale frowned slightly and sized Lorna up from head to toe. Lorna wasn't used to it and she lowered her head and rubbed her fingers bashfully. Then Kale shook his head and said softly, "Forget it. That style doesn't suit you. You can wear leather clothes like Natasha's and be a pure lackey." Lorna's expression froze. She raised her delicate eyebrows, and her cold and handsome face darkened. Kale stood up from his seat and looked down at her seriously. "Remember, from now on you're a member of Family Cal. Whether you live or die, you'll never be able to shake off this identity and title." Lorna's heart trembled and she nodded subconsciously. She stood up and bent down slightly. She stretched out her right hand and said stiffly, a little unaccustomed to it, "Got it, Bo?" "Boss." Kale smiled. This time he didn't hesitate. He tapped her fair palm lightly with his finger. In just an instant the brilliant aurora shone, then dimmed and extinguished. After Kale returned to his room to rest, only Yutong and Lorna were left in the hall on the top floor. Lorna was still in a daze. She tasted the red wine and secretly looked at her palm from time to time. No one knew what she was thinking. Watching all of this from the side, Yutong's jewel-like eyes became even more worried. She activated her ability and said a few words to Lorna in her mind. Lorna's expression changed drastically. She put the glass back on the table in a panic and explained, "Yutong, you're thinking too much. I just want to stay by your side and protect you from being harmed by him. Isn't this buy one get one free?" Yutong rolled her eyes but didn't expose her. She was just worried for Lorna. Boss was perfect in everything, but he was severely lacking in certain aspects. As a human, he was cold and heartless. As long as Lorna walked into this pit, she would never be able to escape. She could only wait for an indefinite period of time. One day you'll understand that it's not that we're not outstanding enough. It's just that we're half a century too late and missed the best period. Yutong warned Lorna in her mind one last time and didn't say anything else. What she didn't know was that this only aroused Lorna's competitiveness. In the afternoon he slept all the way until night fell. Kale woke up feeling refreshed. Just as he left the room, Yutong received a new message about SHLD. Afternoon. Captain America Steve and SHLD Deputy Director Natasha entered SHLD's headquarters together. Half an hour later, HLD's agents were mobilized on a large scale to pursue and arrest the two of them. Director SHLD also issued an official arrest warrant at SHLD. "What about now?" Kale asked as he washed his face. Yutong reported, "The SHLD agents haven't been caught yet. Also, our people sent a message saying that Steve and Natasha have already left New York City and are heading toward New Jersey." New Jersey? Kale found the name familiar. He immediately said, "Vice, open the map of the United States and let me see the general location of New Jersey." "Yes, master." Weiss appeared out of nowhere and jumped to the side of the washstand. Its mechanical eyes shot out a circular digital map projection. Kyle glanced at it and said thoughtfully, "So that's how it is. There's a recruit training base very close to New Jersey." "Recruit training base?" "Master, there's no military base in this area," Weiss reminded him. "Of course. After all, that's the recruit training base from 1944. Steve and I came from there. There's no mistake." Kale smiled. Now that he thought about it, that was the original starting point, the place where he was reborn. "Prepare the fighter jet." "Let's go take a look," Kale said with interest. "Yes." Yutong and Weiss answered in unison. Chapter 275. Near the border of the United States, New Jersey. It was already late at night, and the desolate wilderness was pitch black, with only a few rays of light cast down by the stars. Several abandoned ancient fortresses and military buildings stretched across the land like huge tombs, surrounded by high-voltage electric fences that had been out of power for an unknown number of years. Two shadows, one big and one small, quietly appeared, agilely climbing over the 3-meter-high electric fence and entering the old military base that was sealed off. The signal disappeared here. There should be a router and equipment to isolate the signal. Natasha said helplessly as she held up the signal detector. She turned around and saw Steve standing at the door, looking absent-minded as he stared blankly at the modern-style building in front of him. "What's wrong? Did you find anything?" Natasha asked in surprise. Steve shook his head and said with emotion, "This is where Kale and I started from when we were born in the military." "Patriarch." Natasha was surprised. She looked at the unremarkable military base again, her beautiful eyes filled with extraordinary splendor. It was one thing to cultivate Captain America, but she didn't expect that even the symbol of peace came from here. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this base was the place where legends rose. When those two soldiers left during the war era of World War II, they were like two suns, shining through the darkness and shining brightly in the world. "Follow me. The building next to us didn't exist before I left. It should have been added later." Steve waved his hand and led Natasha to the front door of a building. He raised his Adaman shield and rammed it into the locked door with brute force. With a boom, the iron door fell inwards, raising a cloud of dust. Natasha looked at the hole and couldn't help but shake her head inwardly, muttering, as expected of someone who used to fight alongside the Patriarch. The two entered, and Steve fumbled around to turn on the main switch. Countless light bulbs flickered on and off, and then the entire building was filled with dim yellow light again. The interior was obviously an underground studio. There were many bookcases for storing files, desks and chairs, and huge photos of people hung on the walls on both sides of the hall. From left to right, it was Cale, Fry, Howard, and the current SHLD logo of an eagle, sword, and shield. These are the founding members of SHLD. Natasha thought for a moment and said with realization, so that's how it is. This should be where SHLD was first established. When I was recommended by the Patriarch, SHLD headquarters had already been built in New York, and this site was abandoned. It's abandoned on the surface, but there are people who use it. As Steve spoke, he searched with his rich experience and quickly found an underground dark room. They continued to delve deeper to find the secrets hidden behind S.H.I.E.L.D. 5 minutes later, the two of them were in a standoff with a supercomputer in the basement. That's right, the enemy was a supercomputer. To be more precise, it was an internal, artificial intelligence of SHLD that was pieced together by a room full of multi-unit storage machines, old-fashioned monitors, dusty cameras, and so on. However, this artificial intelligence was not a machine-derived mind. It was a former Hydra scientist who converted his brain memory and consciousness into code before he died and stored it in the supercomputer. This intelligent host had been secretly guiding Hydra for decades to infiltrate SHLD. And even Frey's highest authority was deleted. This was the most serious mistake SHLD made since its establishment. They should not have chosen to accept former Hydra scientists to complete the human-turn-machine experimental research for the sake of rapid development. Captain Steve, I still remember very clearly that you got on the train with that demon and wanted to kill us all. A digitally formed skeletal smiley face was projected on the screen, and a cold mechanical voice came from the loudspeaker. It's you. Steve frowned. He remembered that more than 60 years ago, on a high-speed train, the Hydra scientist that the commando mission was to capture. In that battle, Baki fell to the bottom of an iceberg in order to save him. If it weren't for Cale's Blue Eagle, all three of them would have died. Finally, you remember me. The skeletal man grinned and said smugly, but one of you three has been fighting for us for the past 10 years, so he has made up for his sins. Steve's body trembled as the veins on his forehead bulged. He said angrily, is it Baki? Where the hell is he? Tell me. He is the one who attacked Nick Fry in the afternoon. He is still in New York, very safe. But the two of you are about to die. At this point, the skull could no longer hold back his anger and revealed his hidden killing intent and claws. Ka. The main door of the basement suddenly closed automatically, sealing off the hall where the supercomputer was stored. Captain. Natasha looked around and had a bad feeling. Years of battle experience reminded her to run away from this place. What did you do? Steve was shocked. He raised his fist and punched the screen showing the skeletal man. But then, another screen lit up and the skeletal man laughed and said, from the moment you came in, missiles were launched at this location. I have been stalling for time. In 5 seconds, everything here will be destroyed. There is no time to escape. Damn it. Steve's face changed drastically. He hugged and pressed Natasha under him as fast as he could and raised the Ada-man shield above their heads with his other hand. The skull was still laughing maniacally, acting as the Grim Reaper's countdown. 3, 2, 1. The next moment, the expected missile bombardment didn't happen. All the sounds stopped and the basement fell into a strange silence. Steve was surprised. He looked up at the screen, but the skeletal man's digital face was still in a daze. Even it didn't know what had happened. The skeletal man mumbled to himself, where are the missiles? How did this happen? The missile signal suddenly disappeared? Boom. At the same time, the automatically closed underground door seemed to have been hit from the outside. A huge hammer mark appeared on the steel door. Steve put down the shield and let out a long breath. He's here. It's over. Natasha shrugged. The skeletal man didn't understand. The next moment, the sound of the collision became several times louder. The entire building seemed to shake violently. The steel door, which was theoretically impenetrable, couldn't take the pressure and collapsed. At the door, Cale put away his hammer-shaped left hand and walked in calmly with a piece of metal shell in his right hand. 1 meter behind him, Yutong and Lorna followed closely into the hall, one on the left and one on the right. Chapter 276. Cale. Family Master. Steve and Natasha greeted each other with a smile. As if they had found their backbone, the solemnity on their faces had disappeared. Are you all right? Cale nodded in response and threw the shell wreckage in his right hand onto the ground. It was a close call, but what's that? Steve looked down and sized up the strangely shaped metal shell. There was still some black smoke coming out of it. Could it be? Natasha thought of a possibility, and her mouth opened in shock. Cale said calmly, "A missile. I ran into it on the way and I smashed it down." Steve, Natasha slapped her forehead. As expected, saw a missile on the way and smashed it down? Do you think it's a paper plane so simple? Sorry, in front of the current youth, dismantling a missile with bare hands is so simple. Beep beep. The camera on the computer monitor adjusted its direction. The Hydra scientists had no eyes now, so they could only see with the help of the camera. The camera first aimed at Yutong, and the computer program performed facial recognition. In a cold mechanical voice it said, "Yutong Carl, born in Nissan 1942. Originally the most perfect android in the Nissan research lab, now one of the three giants of Family Cow. Warning. Target is an extremely dangerous person. Contact is prohibited." The camera continued to rotate. This time it was aimed at Lorna, who happened to be walking forward. The mechanical voice became more human-like. Lorna Dan, born in Germany in 1993. Research Lab superpower experimenter. Ability to control magnetic fields and gravity. Warning. Target is an extremely dangerous person. Capture with caution. Cale was slightly stunned. He looked at Lorna and said in surprise, "You're still underage in 1994? It was only the end of 2008. A 15 or 16-year-old loli had matured so quickly and had the demeanor of a mature sister. As if her age had been exposed, Lorna gritted her teeth and glared coldly at the computer. The camera made a final adjustment, and Cale's figure was reflected in the lens. The figures that were piecing together the skull suddenly became chaotic, and a mechanical voice spoke intermittently, "Cale Adolph. Born in America. Legendary hero, symbol of peace. It's actually you. Warning. The target is the most dangerous person. Please leave the scene immediately or self-destruct." The realistic and somewhat funny warning sound, after the judgment and identification of the Hydra database, screamed crazily in the basement. The skull immediately obeyed the government's judgment, deleted the built-in data, and activated the self-destruct program. The situation had taken a sharp turn. Several screens were displaying the countdown to self-destruction. Some of the mainframes in the room had already begun to smoke. "Cale, you scared it so much that it's about to self-destruct," Steve said anxiously, feeling a little incredulous. "What?" Cale nodded and called out softly. "I know what to do, Master." From Cale's body, a small rocket suddenly flew out and transformed into the front end of a plug like a weapon. It sank into the jack of one of the mainframes. In a short second, the black smoke no longer spread to the other mainframes, and the self-destruct program on the screen was turned off. From the loudspeaker came a cold and mechanical scream. "Who are you? Don't come over, Wah. Come on." In the meantime there was a faint Vice chuckle. "Do you want to die? How can it be that simple? Let me teach you a lesson." Cale's mouth twitched. Vice, this dog, had been behaving more and more like an old gentleman, ever since it ran to Tani's studio. However, evil people had their own evil people to deal with. There was nothing wrong with using artificial intelligence to deal with. Cale reminded, "Don't kill it directly. Kill it after you get the Hydra database." "Yes, Master." Vice quickly replied, immersed in the pleasure of teaching the villain a lesson. Unlike Venom, which could fight side by side with Cale in a symbiotic manner, it could only act as a system support in the Iron Man mode. It was a rare opportunity to show off its skills, so how could Vice let it go? Cale looked at Steve, then at Natasha, and said, "Okay, leave this to me. You two should go now." "Go." Steve and Natasha looked at each other and asked in surprise, "Why?" Lorna raised her beautiful face and said coldly, "Hydra's armed team is gathering outside. We'll cover them and attract their firepower. You non-combatants should evacuate the scene first." "Non-combatants?" Steve's handsome old face froze. This sentence was absolutely sarcastic to him. At the very least, he was still Captain America in World War II. Natasha's expression also changed slightly. Anger appeared in her eyes as she looked at Lorna coldly. She was the most outstanding agent of the Soviet Red Room, the Black Widow. How could she be a non-combatant? "Okay, little girls don't know anything." Cale reached out with his left hand, rubbed the short dark green hair, and pressed Lorna's cold face behind her back. An aurora emerged from the point of contact. Lorna, who had always been rebellious, buried her face in her hair and remained silent. Cale reminded Steve, "What I meant was, the two of you should have something to do right now, right?" Steve was stunned for a moment before he quickly remembered that New York City was in danger. Winter Soldier, Project Insight, and the Hydra spies in us. LD. Got it. Natasha, let's go. At the thought of Baki, Steve couldn't stay any longer. He grabbed Natasha and left the basement. Kale, I'll have to trouble you here. After Steve said that, the sound of his footsteps faded away and could no longer be heard. Kale shrugged and said in a low voice, "What trouble? It's just a battle." Behind him, Yutong smiled in agreement. Indeed, it was just a battle. What trouble could there be? In terms of combat, the family cow was truly an ancestor on Earth. Especially now, with the combat power they had here, anyone who came would suffer. It's been a long time since we fought Hydra. I hope they'll remember this time. Let's go. We'll fight them on the ground. Kale put down his hand and strode upstairs. Lorna smoothed her messy hair, and the blush on her face faded as she followed Yutong. A while later, Kale and the other two arrived at the rooftop of the third floor of the building. Looking around, they saw fighter jets and armored vehicles not far away. They formed an encirclement by flying and on land. They were also conducting a carpet search with their headlights on. They slowly surrounded the old base they were in. Steve and Natasha had left earlier and were now nowhere to be seen. With their skills, they should be able to break through the encirclement of Hydra soon. Kale thought for a moment, then took out a few items from his card space and placed them on the rooftop. He snapped his fingers, and a wisp of flame jumped out of his fingertip and accurately shot at the items on the ground. The next moment, the fuses of the items were ignited, and several miniature rockets shot into the sky. Boom. A few brilliant fireworks bloomed in the sky, and the night sky instantly became as bright as day, temporarily illuminating the old base below. This was what it meant to attract firepower and hatred. Under the fireworks, Kale stood in the night wind and looked down, waiting for the arrival of the enemy. Chapter 277. Dazzling fireworks bloomed in the sky above the base. The flames and light were eye-catching, attracting the attention of everyone within a few miles. They should still be in the base. Let's go. We can't let them escape. Fighter jets hovering at low altitudes and armored vehicles conducting a carpet search were like sharks that smelled blood. They suddenly sped up and swarmed toward the old base. Two people hiding in the shadows of the night stood up in the bushes not far away from the base after they left quickly. It was a bit dangerous, but that was... Natasha looked in the direction of the base in surprise. No need to think about it. It must be Kale's doing. Steve smiled bitterly. In the face of such a dangerous situation, Kyle was probably the only one who would mischievously light up fireworks. Without thinking too much, Steve and Natasha took advantage of this rare opportunity to break out of the base. Let's go back to New York City first, but people from SHLD are still looking for us. We need to find a reliable helper. Steve ran while his eyes fell on Natasha. Don't look at me. The people I know are all from SHLD. Natasha waved her hand and said hesitantly, also, although people from Family Cal count from the leader's attitude just now, he doesn't seem to be in a hurry about New York City. Before I know what he's thinking, I won't ask for help from the family. Steve asked curiously, the Family Cal founded by Kale? What kind of family power is this? Project Insight could threaten the safety of the world. Was this not enough for them to fight? You'll find out in the future. Family Cal members only listen to the leader. They don't issue any orders from the leader. They are all kings of their own forces or underground organizations. Natasha argued and didn't want to say more. The goal of the members of the Carl family was evolution and longevity, which were difficult for ordinary people to understand. Other than facing the family head, Kyle, everyone had their own pride and temperament. Natasha wasn't interested in the other members of her family except for a few people in her family. Steve nodded helplessly. Then there's no other way. You can only rely on me. But I just woke up from the ice not long ago and I don't know anyone. Halfway through his words, he suddenly thought of something and his eyes lit up. Right. Steve remembered that in the military rehabilitation center, there was a black man who had retired from the military. He seemed to have been a U.S. military pilot. I know someone who should be reliable. Follow me to find him. Oh. Natasha nodded and asked casually, wait, how many days have you known him? 7 days. After the non-combatants left the base, a night battle began in the old base. No, it should be said that it was a massacre. Buzz, the enemy's small fighter jet, was the first to arrive. Its engine made a humming noise as it passed through the base's electric fence. It rushed toward the top of the building like a goshawk. Yu Tong was about to fight when Kale nudged Lorna and said, "There's no need to worry. Use your ability to your heart's content. Let me see your true strength." Lorna was pushed to the front, caught off guard. Looking at the small fighter jet coming toward her, she pouted and raised her hands coldly. Who's afraid of who? In fact, she hadn't fully used her ability since a few years ago when she escaped from the Hydra lab and her ability went berserk. Until now. At this moment. Lorna took a deep breath. Her gem-like eyes were solemn. Her hair fluttered without any wind, and her palm glowed with a green mist effect under the activation of her ability. Gravitational traction. In a short moment. The small fighter jet flying less than 30 meters high suddenly tilted a little as if it had been affected by an abnormal gravitational force. It was about to crash into the roof of the building. Kale looked up. The small fighter jet kept enlarging in his pupils. He couldn't help but quicken his tone and say, "Don't stop. Try harder." Lorna's face was slightly pale. She turned her palm and a green mist surged in the air. Magnetic field control. It was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. It was also like the pressure of 1,000 kilograms had increased by dozens of times. Time and space seemed to have frozen at this moment. The enemy fighter jet stopped 10 meters in front of the building. It was like a delay of half a second in a cartoon, and then it fell heavily, almost in free fall. The fighter jet crashed on the grass in front of the building and turned into a scorching fireball. The explosion surged more than 10 meters, blowing Lorna's dark green hair into a mess. Her beautiful and cold face was handsome and domineering under the light of the fire. Even women would be swayed by it. But in less than a second, Lorna couldn't maintain her aloof expression anymore. Her pale face was flushed red. She clenched her fists excitedly and looked at Kale with anticipation and pride. "How is it? Not bad, right?" Pulling down a fighter jet with his ability alone, even if it was flying at a low altitude, was enough to shock ordinary people to the extreme. "Not bad." Kale chuckled. Lorna, who was full of adrenaline, felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her. She snorted in dissatisfaction. Kale shook his head inwardly. Not bad was an objective evaluation that was just right in terms of ability. The combination of gravitational traction and magnetic control was practically a semi-invincible domain when unleashed to the extreme. Tearing down a small fighter jet in flight was just the use of the ability that had just left the basics. Kale's ears twitched. His extraordinary senses sensed danger approaching. He pondered and said, "You don't believe me? I'll show you what a true application of abilities is." As soon as he finished speaking, Kyle and the other two broke free from gravity and floated up. They left the rooftop and flew into the sky. The next moment, the building below was hit by a fierce bombardment. In the destructive explosion, the building collapsed into ruins with a rumble. 20 meters in the air, the three of them seemed to be in space capsules as they flew under the guidance of various forces. "Why am I flying? How did you do it?" Lorna exclaimed and looked at Kale with sparkling eyes. Unexpectedly, Yu Tong covered her mouth and chuckled. "Look closer. Isn't this your ability?" Kale couldn't help but laugh. With his reminder, Lorna finally noticed that there was a familiar green mist around Kale's fingers. There were traction forces from above, below, left, and right, causing them to leave the ground and remain suspended in the air, thereby achieving the effect of flight. "This is gravitational guidance. It can actually be used like this?" Lorna was shocked. She even forgot why Kale had her ability. The enemy troops that had arrived at the base fired their rocket launchers into the air again. The shells dragged their tails and flames as they rushed toward the three of them. "Not only can it be used like this, but it can also be used like this," Kale said as he formed a sword with his index and middle fingers and tapped the air at the menacing shells. Gravity distorted and the air froze like a swamp. The rocket launchers kept slowing down until they stopped half a meter away from his fingertips. This half meter was an insurmountable chasm. Chapter 278. The rocket launcher's tail flame was still spurting, but it couldn't break through another inch. It stopped in the air half a meter away. "Go back." Kale pointed again and the green fog light effect wrapped around his fingers. The light gathered at his fingertips and condensed into a dazzling green light. Under his precise and perfect control, the direction of gravitational traction was immediately reversed, and the three rocket shells slowly turned around and returned to their original trajectories. Boom, boom, boom. 3 small fireballs exploded on the ground again, illuminating a corner of the base. Many of the Hydra armed forces who had just gathered from the outside were shocked. "What a pity. It's just gravitational traction, the lowest branch of the force field series. This is almost the limit of my ability. Kale sighed softly and retracted his 2 fingers. Although the ability to fly slowly, create a certain gravitational repulsive field, and deflect a rocket launcher seemed very powerful, it was actually the greatest effect of the gravitational traction ability. There was no room for further exploration and development of its potential. Using gravitational traction was fine against ordinary people, but against superhumans like Black Widow and Captain America, who had strengthened their bodies, it could only be used as an auxiliary means to affect their movements. And against people like Thor and Hulk, it could only be used as a suppressive ability. After all, it was only a blue ability card. For it to reach this level, it was already a supreme grade card close to the rare rank. But this performance was still enough to shock Lorna. It was as if she had opened the door to a new world. Her beautiful eyes stared straight at Kale. "Boss, you have to teach me the proficiency ability later." Kale shook his head and said calmly, "In terms of the use of mutant abilities, Yutong, Logan, and I are still a little lacking. They're the experts at developing their abilities to the extreme." "Who's Logan?" Lorna tilted her head. Kale shrugged and said, "One of the founding members of Family Cal. He's not on Earth right now." "Not on Earth?" Lorna was stunned. Clearly, she hadn't integrated into Family Cal yet. If she was familiar with some things in the family, she wouldn't be making a fuss over some unnatural things. "You'll find out in the future." Pondering, Kale looked down at the enemies who had entered the base and said to Yutong, "Go. Let Lorna see the full extent of your abilities." Yutong nodded. Silver light flowed in her eyes. Wrapped in a layer of faint fluorescent light, she broke free from the gravitational field in the air and flew down. "Yutong can fly as well." Lorna's jaw dropped in surprise. She had a good relationship with Yutong, but she had never seen Yutong display all of her abilities. She had always thought that it was just a mind-reading ability. Kale explained, "Yutong's ability is telekinesis. According to its potential, it's between your gravitational pull and magnetic field control." Lorna's heart trembled slightly. Her sense of superiority over her own abilities disappeared as she stared at Yutong. She fell. Only when she was half a meter above the ground did Yutong stop in the air. She stood lightly on the concrete ground of the base square. The hem of her black dress fluttered slightly as her silver eyes scanned the enemies around her mercilessly. She was alone, but she chose to land in the middle of the enemy army. She was like a flirtatious black rose that bloomed in a unique place. Bulletproof armed vehicles with machine guns were densely parked around the perimeter. The moment Yutong fell into the field, hundreds of armed soldiers uniformly aimed their guns at her. "Enemy. Shoot. Kill her." The experienced members of Hydra wouldn't be careless just because the other party was a beautiful woman. In just a short moment they decisively reacted. Da-da-da. Blue flames emerged from the muzzles of the guns. The dense torrent of bullets formed a large net that covered Yutong. Lorna, who saw this scene in the sky, couldn't help but cry out in surprise. She instinctively wanted to reach out and use her ability to save her. The next moment she stopped all her actions. Shock and horror replaced her eyes. Yutong raised her slender hands slightly and spread her palms to both sides, forming a circular air shield around her body. The rain of bullets all lost their momentum as soon as they got within a meter of her and were strangely nailed in the air. They came from all directions. A round of bullets lasted more than 10 seconds. The armored soldiers didn't stop until all the bullets in the clip were poured out. Yutong, who was in the middle, was surrounded by dense bullets. The bullets nailed in the air formed a steel eggshell. Even people who didn't have trypophobia gasped when they saw this. Their backs were cold and their scalps were numb. "Is this a repulsive ability?" Lorna asked in surprise. "It's also mental control. It's just concentrating one's mind to form an absolute mental control field within a meter of the body. Any external attack will be blocked outside." At this point, Kale praised from the bottom of his heart. This is the power of Yutong's ability to the extreme. That 1 meter area is her exclusive domain. Even God can't set foot in it. When a rare blue ability card was used to such a perfect extent, it would be able to fight even against an enemy with a purple ability card. In the base square, inside the bullet encirclement, Yutong's eyes shone brightly with silver light. A super strong mental power was activated from her brain and condensed into an invisible shockwave that burst outward. Bzzzt, the bullets nailed in the air vibrated. Then they were wrapped by her mental power and exploded into pieces, shooting at the armored soldiers around her with pale faces. Swoosh. In the front row there were nearly 30 or so armed men. They all groaned in pain and fell down, just like the scene of a sickle harvesting wheat. There were countless bullet holes on the corpses. Viscous blood gushed out. They would never have dreamed that they would be killed by their own bullets. Yutong was unscathed. Her beautiful silver eyes were cold. Not even a trace of blood was stained on her dark black dress. This was Qi-Tong, the Black Queen, one of the 3 heads of Family Cow, the Guardian. So strong. Lorna was amazed. Kale nodded. This precise mental control was far more perfect than it was 60 years ago. It's a pity that it's only a rare blue ability. If it's a rare purple ability, Kale thought for a while and was stunned. He looked at Yutong below and narrowed his eyes, deep in thought. Where did the mutated ability of mental control come from? It was a genetic mutation, the first benign evolution of humans. Since genes could evolve once and obtain superpowers from nothing, was it possible to evolve a second time on top of the foundation? A second evolution, shouldn't it be called ability awakening? Is it possible for Yutong's ability to awaken? If her ability awakens, will her ability card advance to the purple level? Kale thought to himself. His eyes shone. Chapter 279. Superpowers could be awakened and evolved. Kale was certain of this. For example, there was a saying of awakening in the Protoss genes, which meant that ordinary Protoss could evolve into the king of gods like Odin. Unfortunately, there were very few mutants in this world. There were no precedents, so there was no way to know the basic conditions for awakening. But at this moment, seeing Yutong unleashing her superpower to the extreme, Kale suddenly understood something. If there was awakening, Yutong was undoubtedly infinitely close to the threshold of fullness. She was just a little bit away from triggering it. But it's just half a step, invisible and untouchable. It's easier said than done to break the shackles of superhuman ability and awaken superhuman genes for the second time. Kale sighed in his heart and stopped thinking about this problem. He just planted a seed of hope in his heart. In the square of the base, under the dark night, corpses were strewn all over the ground. Blood gathered and flowed into scarlet streams. Yutong's long skirt swayed. She tiptoed and walked forward like a cat. She was elegant and extremely dangerous, like a beautiful and deadly leopard on the grassland. She stepped on the blood and corpses, but her shoes and skirt were not stained at all. Everything, including the tiny dust particles in the air, was isolated by the rippling mental waves in the void. 1 meter within her body, the mental domain. Bang! The loud and dull sound of a sniper rifle came from afar. In the next moment, the spiral armor-piercing bullet had crossed the distance of half a kilometer and pierced through the air toward Yutong's forehead. Buzz! The power of this sniper bullet was amazing. Under the obstruction of the mental domain, it broke through half a meter in front of Yutong before finally stopping. But that was it. Not to mention half a meter, even a millimeter difference was a natural moat. But then, the second and third sniper rifle shots rang out again. Yutong's eyes flashed silver. She flicked her fingers and the light of her mental domain intertwined. The first bullet was converted into her own power and rebounded. Bang! The bullets collided and then burst into tiny metal fragments. One of the fragments continued to move forward under the strong support of her mental domain. The fragment and the third bullet met and burst into pieces again. What? On a hill half a kilometer away, a top sniper suddenly raised his head, his face full of shock and disbelief. I found you. Yutong's lips curled into a smile. At such a long distance, the telepathic ability was already too far to reach. She waved her hand and an enemy rifle on the ground fell into her hand. Before she even aimed, she fired 3 shots at the distant hill. Half a kilometer away, the sniper widened his eyes in horror. He lowered his head and looked at the 2 bullet holes in his chest. His consciousness dissipated and he fell to the ground. Half a kilometer, 2 hits out of 3. Not bad, Kale said with a smile. If the enemy mistakenly thought that Yutong was only good at telekinesis, they would undoubtedly die a horrible death. After all, she had the super agent ability card, and with the addition of her cognition she was almost omnipotent. Rain Eyes was Kyle's most perfect work so far. There was no other work that could compare to it. After Yutong killed the sniper, she took out a clip of bullets and used her telepathic ability to wreak havoc. With a telepathic barrier as protection, she controlled the bullets to launch fierce attacks. With every step she took, several armed soldiers fell. Even more armed soldiers could only fight and retreat, like a lawnmower harvesting lives mechanically and mercilessly. After such a long time, my subordinates and I are getting stronger and stronger, but Hydra is deteriorating. Kale shook his head and looked coldly at the one-sided armed personnel below. In the past, they had laser weapons made from unlimited energy and Red Skull to hold the fort. Now Hydra was really regressing. "Boss, can I go down and play?" Lorna looked at the killing scene below and said eagerly. "Play? Do you think you're playing a game?" Kale looked at her and said, "But it's good to have more actual combat. It's easiest to accept and master your abilities in battle, but you have to bring venom." With that, Kale waved his hand, and a ball of black liquid crashed into Lorna's arms. "Venom? What's that?" Lorna was shocked. She hurriedly touched her chest, only to find that the liquid had quickly seeped into her clothes and body. In Lorna's mind, Venom sighed and whispered, "Sigh, I have to take care of a child again? Child? Who are you calling a child?" Lorna raised her eyebrows in dissatisfaction, but she couldn't find the source of the voice. "I'm talking about you." Dark wings spread out from her back and Lorna cried out in shock. Her hair was in a mess as Venom brought her down. Immediately, an armed personnel aimed and fired. Lorna looked at the dense bullets coming at her and raised her hands in panic. "Wait, I'm not mentally prepared yet." "I know." Venom seemed to be curling his lips, and a dark membrane appeared in time to cover Lorna's slender body. The bullets landed on the dark skin and bounced off. She ignored the bullets and landed deep in the enemy's ranks. "Awesome." Lorna's scarlet eyes lit up as her abilities finally took effect. As the green fog lingered, the rifles in the hands of the armed personnel nearby flew out and floated above her head. The rifles moved closer and formed a circle. The muzzles were slightly tilted and aimed at the armed men. "Goodbye." Lorna smiled coldly and took over all the metal firearms. She rotated and fired, and the unarmed Hydra members fell to the ground with cries of despair. Isn't Venom's cheat a little too big? How can she train her abilities if she deals with it so easily? Kale frowned, but he quickly relaxed. Although Lorna was strong, she wasn't skilled enough. She couldn't quickly and accurately control her abilities. For example, the sniper bullet aimed at Yutong just now might have killed Lorna in her current state. It's allowed in peaceful times that you don't have to hone your abilities and skills on a murderous battlefield. You can slowly grow in a safe greenhouse. Kale retracted his gaze from the intense but foregone conclusion of the battlefield below. 10 minutes later, Yutong and Lorna joined forces and annihilated the Hydra Legion that had besieged the base with overwhelming force, leaving no survivors. When Kale returned to the ground from the sky, Vice happened to push away the bricks and crawl out of the basement buried in the ruins. It flew back with a dirty face. "How was it?" Kale asked it. Weiss reported, "Hydra's highest level of confidential information has been destroyed, but Hydra's hidden base locations all over the world, a total of 35, I have all the information and information. Is there any news of my eldest sister and second brother?" Lorna asked hurriedly. Vice shook its head and replied, "No. Their existence belongs to the highest level confidential files of Hydra." Okay. Lorna bit her lower lip. Tonight's harvest was pretty good. Kale couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't just good. With the location of almost all of Hydra's bases, the situation was very clear. Time was completely on their side. Chapter 280. At this time, Yutong walked back with an enemy satellite communicator in her hand. A small green light was flashing on it. Obviously, someone wanted to get in touch with them. "Boss, this is the communicator on the enemy commander." Yutong handed over the communicator. Kyle took it with one hand and answered the call without any hesitation. The man on the other side of the communicator, after the communication was connected, immediately growled impatiently, "What are you doing? Why are you dilly-dallying? Has Steve Rogers solved it for me?" Kale looked around. Around the three of them, the armed personnel had all become corpses lying on the ground. Hearing no answer, the man was keenly aware that something was wrong and said in a deep voice, "Who are you?" "Who answered the phone?" Kale's mouth rose and said indifferently to the communicator, "One more day." As soon as he finished speaking, his hand exerted a little force and the communicator flashed with sparks and exploded. "Let's go, we'll go back first." Kale patted off the fragments in his hand and gave the next order. It was time for the century-long feud with Hydra to come to an end in New York. New York, next to the SHLD headquarters in a luxurious duplex villa. In the dead of night, the lights in the hall on the third floor were not turned on. Under the dim yellow tile lamp, only two men were sitting on the sofa facing each other. One of the middle-aged men had neat blonde hair, was dressed in a suit and leather shoes, and had a calm and experienced aura of a high position. But at this time, A drop of cold sweat appeared on his forehead, slid down his face and dripped straight from his chin to his expensive trousers. Pierre put down the communicator in a daze, his face pale and his brows furrowed as he thought frantically. The voice of the young man just now, there was no mistaking it, it must be him, Hydra's #1 enemy. Since he's there, it means that the hundreds of armed forces I sent to deal with Captain Steve have been destroyed. Pierre's heart was bleeding, and at the same time, fear spontaneously filled his whole body. He said, "One more day, what does that mean? Does he know all this and will make a move in one more day?" He directly stated that he would make a move in a day. The pressure he gave people was endless. Because he was a symbol of peace and that was enough. Nick Fry is dead and that man probably knows my real identity. There's no turning back now. While Pierre was anxiously thinking about countermeasures, the other man sitting on the sofa opposite him was silent. The man's hair was disheveled, and he was wearing a long-sleeved leather jacket. The entire mechanical arm on his left hand reflected a faint metallic glow, and there was a dark red pentagram symbol on his arm. Pierre seemed to have thought of something. He stared at the silent man and asked, "That's right. Winter Soldier, you must answer me exactly. If you are up against Kale, what are your chances of winning?" Kai. Hearing this name, the Winter Soldier looked up, and there was some fluctuation in his cold and dead eyes. After a long silence, the Winter Soldier said indifferently, "I have no chance of winning against him." As expected. Pierre's face was calm. If the Winter Soldier said that he could block the symbol of peace, he should have been surprised. The Winter Soldier could only be used to deal with Steve at most, but against an enemy of Kale's level, ordinary means were far from enough. Time is too tight. The aircraft carrier must be sent to the sky before tomorrow morning. As for Kale, Pierre was firm in this idea. Oh. The Winter Soldier's ears moved slightly, and he suddenly stood up, looking coldly at the door of the hall. At some point, a person only 1 meter short, wearing a black cloak and his figure and face could not be seen clearly, stood at the door and looked at them quietly. Pierre said coldly, "What is it?" "Deal with it." Without his order, the Winter Soldier had already moved ahead and crossed about 10 meters at a superhuman speed. He jumped directly over the dwarf, clenched his mechanical left fist and slammed it down. Bang! The fist fell on the smooth floor of the hall, and under the impact of several tons, the tiles instantly cracked and collapsed like a spider web. The Winter Soldier's eyes were cold. He missed, and he did not see the opponent's dodging movements and traces at all. The moment before the fist fell on the dwarf disappeared out of thin air without warning. "Behind you." Pierre's surprised voice sounded. When the Winter Soldier heard this, he was still in the air. He used his left fist to support himself on the ground, twisted his waist forcefully, and swept his leg back like lightning. With this kick, even a car would be kicked a few meters away. Whoosh! At the critical moment, the cloaked dwarf disappeared out of thin air, and the Winter Soldier's attack missed again. Before Pierre could react, he saw a black shadow flash, and the cloaked dwarf sat on the sofa in front of him. "If you make another move, I will kill this guy." The cloaked dwarf made an old and hoarse voice pointing at Pierre. The Winter Soldier naturally would not listen to the threat and was about to rush forward. Pierre hurriedly waved his hand to stop him. "Winter Soldier, stop." The Winter Soldier stiffly stopped, standing in the hall like a sculpture. Pierre looked at the cloaked dwarf and asked respectfully and fearfully, "This old gentleman? Don't talk nonsense. You just need to know that I am here to help you." The cloaked dwarf interrupted him. "Help me?" Pierre was a little confused. The cloaked dwarf said very easily, "Aren't you going to deal with the symbol of peace tomorrow? I will help you stop him." "You stop the symbol of peace?" Pierre took a deep breath and asked suspiciously but excitedly, "I don't know what to call you?" The cloaked dwarf said seriously, "Me? Call me Little Ancestor." Dehau Building, Underground Conference Hall. A temporary secret meeting was being held here, held by Kale. Hulk, Banner, Iron Man, Tawny, Colonel Ross, and General Thunderbolt were invited to participate. They were the most reliable and powerful outsiders that Kale could gather, except for Family Cal. Kale tapped his fingers on the table and said calmly, "Vice has just told you the specific matters. The relevant information will be sent to you tomorrow morning. You just need to complete the tasks you are responsible for." Tawny said emotionally, "Godfather, you are exaggerating. It is indeed a big deal." Ross agreed. He looked at General Thunderbolt and said in a low voice, "Our military will give the greatest help, but after all, it is something that has to be done behind the backs of the senators and the president. It is obviously impossible to mobilize the army on a large scale. General Thunderbolt nodded. You just need to provide support. Your army is not needed as the main force. Kale smiled softly. Then who can be the main force? Ross asked curiously. Am I not? Bruce pointed to his nose. Everyone was speechless. Indeed, Hulk alone could defeat an elite army, but it was too easy for him to lose control. Don't worry, I naturally have the main force. Kale said with certainty and calmness. After tomorrow, the century-old foundation of the Hydra organization will be erased from the earth, and they will never be able to rise again. Chapter 281. There was a saying that before welcoming guests or fighting enemies, you should first clean up your house. It was the same principle now. The threat of the Hydra organization was not great, but from time to time, they would jump out and cause trouble just like a piece of rat feces added to the porridge. It was disgusting. Kale decided not to make a move, but once he did, he would break it with one blow, severely injuring and erasing the roots of the Hydra organization. This plan, or secretly plotting, was directly called the Earth Cleanup Plan. The next day in the morning. As usual, the downtown area of New York City was bustling with people and traffic in the steel jungle formed by tall buildings. Today was another peaceful day. Since the beginning of the talk about heroes and the alien era, countless citizens habitually sighed in their hearts and hurriedly entered their own hard and fast-paced day of work. Of course, this was only on the surface of peace and harmony. At this time, where the public's eyes could not reach, the undercurrents of several forces were surging behind the city. Among them, in the area of a veteran service office, in the main hall of a duplex villa. Click. With a slight rotation of the mechanical gear teeth, the rocket-shaped backpack full of technological texture split, and a pair of mechanical wings with a dark metallic luster fluttered open. Each of the high-tech precision gliders was 2 meters long. A 35-year-old black young man, wearing a gray uniform and electronic sunglasses, raised his hands and turned in a circle, showing his high-tech equipment to the two people next to him. Steve, who was sitting in a chair, in addition to being surprised, could not help but blink and ask, "That? You said before that you are an injured retired pilot." "I am indeed a pilot and a paratrooper, but I have carried out the Falcon secret program, so I am half an elite agent," Sam Wilson explained in a deep voice. Natasha did not dwell on it so much and said with a charming smile, "Who cares if it is a vulture or a falcon, as long as we can kill the enemy, now we have more combat power and increase our chances of winning." Steve agreed and was about to continue to say something when the villa's doorbell suddenly rang. The expressions of the three people in the hall changed slightly, and they looked at each other silently. For a moment, even the atmosphere in the room became tense. "I didn't invite guests today and I don't usually have friends." Sam made a hand gesture and communicated using sign language. He did not retract his mechanical wings and was ready to fly at any time. Steve quietly took a few steps forward and took the colorful shield from the sofa. Natasha remained calm as well. She bowed and reached for the holster on her calf. Holding the cold and small gun handle, she pulled out the pistol. Their bodies tensed up and their minds were alert. They were about to take the lead in breaking through. "It's me." As if guessing the high tension of the three people in the room, a steady and powerful voice came from outside the door. Sam was still confused. Steve, who quickly recognized the voice, heaved a sigh of relief. Natasha even put the pistol back and quickly walked over to open the door. Looking at the person outside the door, Sam trembled all over and could not hide his excitement as he exclaimed, "Oh my God, a living symbol of peace." "Birdman?" Kale looked at him with a slightly stunned expression. "You're my ultimate idol. Can you give me an autograph?" Sam fumbled for his uniform but could not find anything. Finally, an idea flashed in his mind and his hand slapped the mechanical wings on his back. "Please sign here." "Sam, that's enough. Last time you said I was your idol." Steve glanced at him in annoyance, put down the shield, and looked at Kale with a questioning gaze. "What's the situation now?" "It's all under control," Kale said with a faint smile. He sat on the sofa and looked at Sam and his mechanical metal wings. Another hero who relied on technology, Falcon. Sure enough, after the Hydra rebellion lurking in his HLD was brought forward, due to Steve's request for help, he also officially embarked on his own life trajectory. "What do you mean by under control?" Steve asked. He was so busy saving the world and worried about this and that, but now he directly said, "Small matter." Kale asked back, "You should know the real purpose of Project Insight, right?" "Of course." Steve nodded and said truthfully, Not long ago we caught a Hydra lackey and learned the truth from him. Hydra wants to use the power of SHLD to control 3 aircraft carriers into the sky and become their exclusive killing weapons. He was only halfway through his sentence when he saw Kale's calm expression and said, "Wait, so you already knew this?" Kale nodded lightly and said in an unquestionable tone, "Steve, when the aircraft carriers are in the sky, you take the smart chip up there and stop or delay their linkage." "No problem." Steve trusted him and agreed without hesitation. He asked curiously, "But what are you going to do?" "I'm going to the SHLD headquarters building." Kale answered indifferently. The few people in the hall suddenly felt a strange chill run down their spines. What did it mean for someone to go to the current SHLD alone? It was thought-provoking and terrifying. No one stopped Kale and no one could stop his actions. Even Fry only begged to delay it for 2 days. "Where are the others?" Natasha was surprised. Only then did she notice that Yu Tong and the newly joined Lorna were not by Kale's side. It had to be known that Yu Tong almost never left Kale's side when he went out personally, unless there were special circumstances. They have something equally important to do. As Kale spoke, he plucked a fresh grape from the fruit plate on the table and threw it into his mouth as he chewed slightly. "Tastes pretty good. Do you want to eat?" "We'll take action after eating." Steve smiled bitterly. How could they be in the mood to eat grapes now? In New York later, no matter what, there would be bloody and smoke-filled disputes and battles. "Take your time eating. We're leaving first." Steve had already put on his tights. Now he placed the Ada-man shield on his back and put on the helmet with half a mask. He returned to his previous World War II uniform. It was exactly the same without any changes. Not bad. Kale was a little bored. It was just the Hydra organization. It wasn't to the point where it was worth him taking it seriously. Steve and the others took their equipment, opened the door and were about to leave. Suddenly they stopped at the door and looked up at the sky in the distance. There were 3 steel fortresses as huge as islands. They seemed to ignore gravity and were slowly rising towards the blue sky under the drive of their engines. They had risen to a height of about 100 meters. "Go. The aircraft carrier is in the sky," Steve hurriedly called out. Without hesitation, he took the 2 of them and left the villa, heading straight for the aircraft carrier. In the villa's hall. "It's 2 hours faster than expected. Can't wait any longer?" Kale chuckled to himself and ordered the vice-deformed electronic watch on his wrist. "Inform everyone that we can act according to the original plan." Chapter 282. On this day it was almost noon. People in the New York area raised their heads in shock and saw 3 huge metal fortresses floating up into the vast blue sky, casting a large shadow over the sky. Confusion, depression, fear, and other emotions caused the cars and pedestrians to stop in the streets and alleys. They looked at the 3 steel aircraft carriers in the sky, forming a triangle. On the highway leading to the city, a black Ford carrying Steve and the others was running at full speed, approaching the aircraft carrier in front of them at high speed. "Sam, drive faster," Steve urged, his left hand still holding a bald man in a suit with silver-rimmed glasses. The man in the suit was in the hands of Captain America and surrounded by the other 2 men. He didn't dare to move. Under the absolute power, there wasn't even a 1 in 10,000 chance of escaping. He sat in the car seat with cold sweat on his forehead and a pale face. He said with difficulty, "Brothers, I've said what I need to say. Where are you taking me now?" Steve didn't hide it and said bluntly, "It's very simple. We don't have the authority to enter the aircraft carrier. We have to borrow your iris and fingerprints to pass through the smart system." The man in the suit's mouth twitched slightly, his face was even paler. He said helplessly, "Are you demons? Pierre will kill me like this." The current director of SHELD, the spy of the Hydra organization, Alexander Pierre? Steve couldn't help but laugh. Natasha and Sam in the front seat also laughed. "Don't worry, he probably can't even take care of himself. It's dangerous." Steve was alarmed. He suddenly lowered his body and pressed the man in the suit down with his left hand. But he was still half a beat too slow. Poof! The glass window on the left exploded. Then, the head of the man in the suit burst from the outside like a watermelon. Red and white liquid splashed everywhere in the car. It was a sniper bullet. Steve was the first to confirm this. He moved his hand away from the headless corpse's waist and raised the shield on his back to block the bullet. Just as he finished this action, a dense barrage of rifle bullets hit the outer shell of the car, and even more fell on the shield with tinkling sounds. The broken shield was dented and fell down in a free fall. Before Steve could breathe a sigh of relief, Natasha, who was in the front passenger seat, exclaimed, "Be careful, there are more in front." As if responding to her warning, the Ford suddenly shook violently. With a huge backward inertia, the speed of the car turned from hundreds of kilometers per hour to zero in a few seconds. The moment the car hit something and stopped, Steve pressed his back against the back seat of the car and kicked the roof of the car with his feet. The entire roof of the roof was destroyed and flew out. He pressed down on the car seat with one hand and pushed hard with his other hand. His tall body jumped out of the car window upside down. After getting out of the car, Steve flipped over and stood firmly on the roof of the Ford. His sharp eyes glanced forward, and his tenacious and fearless mind immediately stirred up waves of emotions. He saw that it was a military green Jeep that had collided with the Ford. The front of both vehicles was smashed into pieces. But this was not the point. The point was that on the roof of the Jeep stood a young man in his 30s. The young man was wearing a cloth mask. His dirty blonde curly hair covered his face, revealing a pair of cold and indifferent eyes. He was wearing a uniform jacket and combat boots. His mechanical metal left arm was particularly eye-catching. He held an old-fashioned AK-47 in both hands. "It's you. Can't be wrong. Lucky." Steve took a deep breath and his face was filled with excitement. Since they separated in the end of World War II, they had both experienced death. After more than half a century they finally met again. But the two people who had fought side by side and gone through fire and water were now confronting each other from different sides. Was God joking? Steve exhaled and was about to step forward. The familiar man in front of him called out the familiar name Baki. In the heart of the Winter Soldier, who had lost his personality, his brain was full of mission instructions. In the darkness that had been silent for a long time, a little shining memory rippled. However, it quickly dimmed and extinguished. The Winter Soldier was expressionless. He mechanically raised the AK-47 with both hands, pulled the trigger and shot at his former comrade, Steve, who was less than 5 meters in front of him. HLD headquarters building. Although the 3 aircraft carriers took off from here, after continuously rising, they gradually deviated from their trajectory and headed toward the city center. They were now thousands of meters away from the surface of the headquarters building. At this moment, a silver-haired young man in casual clothes, with his hands in his pockets, came to the front door as if he was bored. The silver-haired young man raised his eyes and looked around. He looked at the stone statues holding a shield and a sword on the left and right of the door and shook his head in deep irony. He took a few steps forward and arrived at the closed front door. The infrared automatically detected and identified the face and iris. Then a mechanical prompt beeped. The user does not have permission to enter the headquarters. Please leave immediately. Okay. Kyle said to himself in a low voice, even my authority has been deleted. Everything that belongs to me has really been taken away by someone else. However, Vice was not with him for the time being. This time he only brought venom. In that case, there is nothing to feel distressed about. Kale raised his left hand, and the black liquid bubbled out and turned into a cuticle membrane covering his entire arm. 3 sharp dark blades protruded from the bones of his fingers, and the tips quietly pressed against the 3-centimeter thick tempered glass protective door. HLD headquarters building, the director's office located near the top floor. Pierre stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the other side of the line of sight. The 3 aircraft carriers were still steadily rising into the air, causing him to clench and loosen his fists from time to time. His palms were sweaty. Subverting all the countries and forces on Earth, Hydra dominates and changes the world, and now only this last step is left. The Hydra organization's years of dormancy and tolerance, all the painstaking effort and energy put in for this moment of fear in the world. So now, Pierre's heart was filled with anticipation and nervousness. At this moment when his body and mind were extremely tense, the phone on the office table suddenly rang. Pierre quickly stepped forward and saw that it was the number of the headquarters downstairs. He picked up the microphone and said in a deep voice, "What's the matter?" Director and. The female receptionist's words were intermittent, and the communication signal was good. This was because fear made her tongue and teeth tremble. Pierre had an ominous premonition in his heart and shouted, "What? Speak clearly." The female receptionist finally said a complete sentence in horror. The symbol of peace is here." What? Pierce sucked in a breath of cold air. His rosy face turned ghastly pale and he almost fell on the office chair. The thing he was most worried about finally happened. At this time in the lobby on the first floor of SHLD. The tempered glass protective door was closed as before, but there was a triangular gap in the middle that could allow 3 people to pass through. The cross-section of the gap was as smooth as a mirror, and the triangular glass that was cut out was lying inwards on the floor. Using the triangular glass as an ordinary carpet, Cale put away his dark claws. He was surrounded by a large group of agents in suits and leather shoes, and more armed military security guards were approaching. Chapter 283. HELD Headquarters, First Floor Lobby. Due to the forceful intrusion, alarms were activated from the ceiling and walls. HELD's elite agents and military special security forces gathered at the entrance. Many of them were armed with firearms, and some of them were equipped with high-tech equipment such as electric pistols and gravity handcuffs. But as soon as they reached the entrance, they all stopped in their tracks. Their expressions changed to shock and confusion as they looked at the so-called intruder with cold sweat dripping down their foreheads. The intruder was only one person, but he was stronger than thousands of soldiers. It was Cale, the symbol of peace. How could it be him? Most of the people in the lobby held their breaths. They were like subordinates in front of their superiors, or cats in front of lions and tigers. The director of SHELD had given an order earlier. The carrier of Project Insight was about to be activated. Today, anyone who invaded SHLD's headquarters was to be killed. If they couldn't kill them, they were to stall for time until the New York Army arrived. But if the intruder was the man in front of them, who could stand it? Countless agents cursed in their hearts. Except for some Hydra spies who had other identities, they all lowered their heads to hide their fear. Cale looked around. His golden eyes shone with dignity. No one dared to look him in the eye. Cale asked calmly, "What, are you going to stop me?" His words were just as calm, but it was like a clap of thunder that exploded in the lobby. No one dared to answer. Only the alarms in the lobby were still sounding anxiously. The commander of SHELD was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He walked from the back of the crowd to the front and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. He bowed and said respectfully, "Dear Mr. Cale, is there a misunderstanding?" "Misunderstanding?" Cale smiled calmly and asked back, "Since when can't I enter SHLD's headquarters as I please? How is that casual? You even tore down the front door." The commander didn't dare to say it out loud. He forced a smile and said, "Misunderstanding, this must be a misunderstanding. HELD's secret project is starting today, so we've entered a state of alert in advance. No one is allowed to enter or leave the headquarters." "Whose order is this?" Cale asked again. "The current director of SHELD, Alexander Pierre," the director answered honestly, feeling much more confident. Cale's face was cold as he said, "I'm going to see him and ask him in person when SHELD changed its surname to Alexander." Not only did he not give them any face, he did not even try to hide his cold hostility, causing everyone, including the head of the department, to change their expressions. Many SHLD agents sensed that something was wrong and walked to the side to observe silently. Everything that had happened recently was too strange and suspicious. The former director Nick Frey's betrayal and death, the deputy director Natasha's resignation, the captain of the American team, Steve, was on the run, and Project Insight, which was supposed to benefit the future of society, was launched in advance. Some of them had been suspicious for a long time, but they didn't dare to disobey the orders of their superiors. Now that Cale had come to their headquarters alone, they finally connected the dots. Something was wrong. Something big was going on at SHLD. The director seemed to be under great pressure. Cold sweat soaked the lining of his suit. He gritted his teeth and said, "The director is busy right now, can we do it another day?" Bang! A black shadow flashed forward, and the director's body flew backward. His chest was caved in by at least 5 centimeters, and even his internal organs were shattered in an instant. His eyes were filled with disbelief, regret, and resentment. His consciousness dissipated as his life force was severed. Boom! The director's body flew over the heads of countless agents and smashed into the snow-white wall, turning into a pile of mush wrapped in an expensive suit. Kyle appeared at the spot where the head minister was standing, indifferently maintaining his patting posture. Only when the agent's trembling gaze landed on him did he nonchalantly withdraw his left hand. The director of SHELD, who was second only to the deputy director, was swatted to death like a fly in the headquarters building. The SHLD Agents in the lobby were elites from all over the world. They had seen all kinds of situations. But now all of them felt their scalps go numb. Their bodies and minds were dominated by fear. What was bloodshed? What was cruelty? What was the devil? This was it. Half a century's worth of time was simply too long. When an eagle hibernated for too long, people began to doubt the sharpness of its claws. Plus, the title of Symbol of Peace was so popular that many people in the new era had forgotten about it. They had forgotten that Kale once represented the country's strength and conquest. He was first known for his ability to kill enemies with Hydra. He was the meat grinder that dominated the battlefield in World War II. He was the devil butcher that terrorized the enemy countries. They had also forgotten that Kale never talked reason with people. The strong ones would wait for the card to be drawn, and the weak ones would be killed immediately. And the biggest fist was the absolute truth. Whoever stops me is a Hydra spy. You've already seen what happens to them. Kale said as he walked into the lobby. With every step he took, the agents around him took a step back. Even if they were Hydra spies, they wouldn't die for no reason. The agents blocked the elevator and had nowhere to go. Upstairs in the director's office, Pierce slumped into a chair and hung up the phone with a busy tone. His face was pale and bloodless. He made 3 calls in succession, namely to the U.S. military, the U.S. Senate, and the United Nations Commission. This was a common method of borrowing power. When faced with a situation that SHLD couldn't handle, he would pull other forces together to put pressure on them. This method had been successful for more than 60 years. Even Director Fry, Captain America, and others had to suffer a lot because of this. They were pursued and wanted for unwarranted crimes. Until today when he met Kale. Even if he was in a high position, even if he had military power in his hands, even if he had great power, when faced with the young man who invaded the main door, all these methods were ineffective and replaced by a deep sense of powerlessness. I'm already standing at a certain peak, but he's at the end of the starry sky above the peak. Pierre sighed. The phone on the table rang and he subconsciously picked up the microphone. Bureau Chief. We can't stop him. Listening to the frightened words of the correspondent downstairs, Pierre's fingers gripped the microphone so hard that the ends of his bones turned white. He said tiredly, I know, don't stop him, let him come up. The correspondent was relieved and hung up the phone. With a bang, Pierre threw the microphone on the table, stood up from the leather office chair, and paced impatiently in the hall like an ant on a hot pan. This lasted for 5 seconds. Wait, I haven't lost yet. Pierre suddenly raised his head, his bloodshot eyes looked out of the floor-to-ceiling window. The helicopter aircraft carrier was still rising into the distance, becoming 3 small cubes in the sky. Operation Insight, the Hydra plan to eliminate human elites and dissidents, was still in progress. As long as the aircraft carrier is still there, I haven't lost. What's more, even if I fail this time, there will be thousands of Hydras in the future. Pierre thought of this, his face regained its calmness, he tidied up his clothes and appearance, returned to the office chair and sat down. At this time, the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the door approached. Pierre's eyes flashed with a hint of fierceness. In this battle, as long as I can force you to make a move, I will not lose anything. Long live Hydra. Chapter 284. HELD, Headquarters Building, Director's Office. Kale opened the door and walked into the room. When he saw Pierre sitting in the office chair, he couldn't help but smile and say, I thought you would choose to run away. Why would I run away? Pierre responded with a forced smile, cursing in his heart. If he could escape, he would have done so long ago. But in the current situation, running away would only accelerate Hydra's defeat. Everyone could escape, but he couldn't. Once he fell, he would undoubtedly confirm his identity as a Hydra spy, and the rest of the Hydra in SHLD would also be wiped out. Pierce was now bracing himself for the worst. It seems that you are prepared to die. Kale chuckled, walked to the office chair, pulled out the chair and sat down unceremoniously, as if he was the master of the place. The 2 men looked at each other face to face. This was the first time they had met and maybe the last time. Pierre tried to say with emotion, the symbol of peace, Kale. I grew up listening to your heroic name and historical biography. I only knew about you last night. Nick Fry told me. Kale nodded, telling the truth. Pierre heard the first half of the sentence, and a trace of shame and anger appeared in his eyes. When he heard the second half, his eyelids twitched and his eyes widened in surprise. Yes, Fry is not dead yet. What happened yesterday just made you a little less vigilant. Kale continued, and in the end he added, I didn't expect you to really be fooled and change your target from him to Steve. Pierre felt that from the moment they met and talked, his strength and IQ had been humiliated by the other party, but he didn't dare to show the slightest dissatisfaction on his face. There was still a trace of luck in his heart, and he asked humbly, How much do you know? Kale spread his hands and said, Not much, just the practical use of the insight plan, Hydra's occupation and assimilation of S.H.L.D. and phrase attack by the winter soldiers you sent. Pierre heard this and felt dizzy, and he almost fell on the office chair. That's not much? This was almost all of it, all right? Knowing that his identity was exposed, Pierre's humility and flattery disappeared, and he stared at Kale angrily and said with a sneer, So, did you deliberately come here to deal with me? You think too highly of yourself. Kale couldn't help but laugh. He raised a finger, shook it, and said calmly, I heard that there's a smug clown here, so I came to watch the show and take his life. He talked about killing people so casually, but it was undoubtedly the decree of the Grim Reaper that couldn't be changed. Pierre's face was gloomy and uncertain. Anger, fear, powerlessness, and other complex emotions flashed across his face, and then he raised his head and laughed. You think you've won and I've lost. Victory is in your hands, so you came here to humiliate me? Kale didn't respond, and the look in his eyes as if he was looking at a clown struggling provoked Pierre, who had been tolerating it for a long time. You're too arrogant and conceited. Pierre no longer suppressed his emotions. He slammed his palm on the table and said loudly, I know, you must have asked Captain America and the others to rush to where the aircraft carrier is, but you don't know, I sent the winter soldiers in advance and let him lead people to guard there. He paused and said meaningfully, I don't have many cards in my hand, but using the winter soldier's card is just enough to fiercely suppress the card you played. Kale nodded, unexpectedly agreeing with his strategic analysis. The winter soldiers and Captain America, the two sides loved and hated each other and were entangled. To deal with Captain America, sending the winter soldiers was the right thing to do. At least it was a 50-50 chance, enough to delay for a long time. What a pity. As you said, I have many cards in my hand, so I didn't just play the Captain America card. Kale smiled indifferently. Stopping the aircraft carrier was a big deal. How could he put all the burden on Steve's shoulders? The so-called control of the battle situation was to have a suppressive force above the enemy and enough to deal with all the unexpected factors that happened in the process. What did you say? Pierre opened his mouth in disbelief. At this time, on the highway near the viaduct, Steve's group was scattered, hiding behind abandoned cars on the road, avoiding the gunfire suppression from the Hydra armed team. Steve and Sam were behind the side of the same car, spying on the enemy's encirclement. Sam glanced at the winter soldiers with guns more than 10 meters away and asked in surprise, Captain, you were talking to the leader just now. Do you know him? He was my former comrade and friend in World War II. Now he should be brainwashed and controlled by the Hydra organization. Steve said with a complicated expression. I hope he can see that you are an old friend and go easy on you. Sam complained. When he saw the new weapon in the winter soldier's hand, the mechanical metal wings were activated urgently, and at the same time his face changed dramatically and he shouted, Get out of the way! Before he finished speaking, he flew into the sky to escape. The next moment, a high-explosive rocket launcher was launched from the winter soldier's hand, dragging the tail flame and bombarding the car in place. The car immediately exploded into a huge burning fireball. Steve reacted very quickly, rolling back on the ground and blocking the adman shield in front of him. The waves of fire and debris hit the shield and separated to both sides. Before he could even catch his breath, the second rocket launcher had already arrived, exploding on his shield. With a shield in hand, Steve was sent flying by the impact of the explosion. He flew in a parabola of more than 10 meters and fell from the viaduct with the same momentum. What the hell, so ruthless, is this really a comrade? Sam in the air saw this scene and was speechless and wanted to find a way to deal with it. Da-da-da. A magazine of bullets was fired accurately, and Sam flew sideways to avoid it. He had no choice but to rise to a safe distance. In the air, in the face of the enemy's sharpshooter, he was simply a live target. The winter soldier was expressionless as he withdrew his cold gaze from the air. He threw away the rifle that had run out of ammunition and took the Gatling that the two armed men on the side struggled to carry. With one hand holding the pistol and the lower end of the barrel in the other hand, the winter soldier jumped off the viaduct murderously and turned into a war-killing machine to chase after Steve. Whoosh! The round shield rotated lightly and quickly, turning slightly like a dart and hitting the back of the winter soldier's head. The Winter Soldier's ears moved slightly. With one hand holding the Gatling, his mechanical left arm slammed back, and the round shield turned back according to its original trajectory. Steve's tall figure jumped out, caught the round shield in the air, put it on his arm and said in a heavy voice, "Baki, have you really forgotten me?" What responded to him was a barrage of bullets formed into a torrent, sweeping across the cement ground and leaving a terrible scene of potholes. The shield was erected in front of him and all the bullets were bounced off. Steve faced the flaming Gatling, not retreating but advancing. Chapter 285. The Winter Soldier's face was cold, and he held the heavy steel Gatling in his hand. He ignored the huge recoil and fired all the bullets forward. Alderman's shield blocked all the way. Steve broke through and closed the distance. When he was close, the Winter Soldier picked up the Gatling and threw it at the top of Alderman's head. Kaka. As soon as the shield was lifted, Gatling immediately deviated and flew out. But in this way Steve exposed his unguarded abdomen. The Winter Soldier's eyes were sharp, and he did not miss this opportunity. The mechanical arm showed inhuman explosive power, and his fist was like a cannonball. Fast, accurate and ruthless. Steve groaned in pain. His abdomen was injured and he flew back with his shield. He fell to the ground and rolled 10 meters away. The Winter Soldier's body had been modified for a long time, and his physique was not inferior to that of a super soldier. The most important thing was the mechanical left arm, which could be used as the main weapon to hit with several tons of impact force. If this was Captain America or an ordinary person, one punch would be enough to kill him. Even so, Steve's forehead was still covered with cold sweat. He covered his abdomen with one hand and held the shield with the other to get up. But once the Winter Soldier attacked, he would not show any mercy. There was a whistling sound in his ears and Steve did not bother to get up. He took the initiative to fall and continued to roll back. As soon as he made this move, the Winter Soldier jumped down from the sky, and his leather boots trampled on the place where he was originally standing. The mechanical left arm reflected a cold light in the sun, and the clenched left fist smashed forward. Bang! Steve kept rolling and dodging, and the metal left fist brushed past his body and fell on the hard concrete ground made by the Winter Soldier. In an instant, spiderweb-shaped cracks with a diameter of 1 meter appeared. That was close. Steve gritted his teeth, rolled away and threw out the round shield again. The shield spun and whistled through the air, flying straight toward the Winter Soldier's neck. The Winter Soldier raised his eyes coldly. His left arm, which was still clenched and pressed against the ground a moment ago, raised quickly like lightning, and slapped the oncoming shield with a reaction far faster than others. The shield buzzed, and this time it did not return the way it came. It flew askew to the side and plunged straight into the carriage of an abandoned bus on the side of the road. Steve lost his shield and finally got a chance to breathe. He quickly got up with his hands on the ground. He didn't retreat. Instead, he moved his body slightly and spat out a mouthful of bloody phlegm. He got into a posture ready for close combat and said with great pride, "You know, I can still fight like this for a day and night." Hearing this sentence, the Winter Soldier paused for half a second, and then quickly dissipated, and returned to his original indifference. "Baki, come on. I'll make you think of me." Steve pointed at the Winter Soldier who was 5 meters away and said straightforwardly with his left fist. The Winter Soldier did not speak, he waved his hand and waved his hand. As if in accordance with his order, a brand new submachine gun with a full magazine was thrown from the back of the group of accomplices. "You've really changed. You can't play like this, right?" Steve smiled bitterly and did not dare to stay any longer. He turned and ran in the direction of the nearby bunker. Just as he quickly rushed out a few meters, the bullets chased after him. "Can you come over and help?" Natasha, not far away, shouted loudly. She was fighting fiercely with 4 or 5 armed soldiers in close combat. Her bright red hair was dancing like flames, and her vigorous figure was fierce and beautiful. "I can't get away from here," Steve responded helplessly. His back was against an abandoned yellow car, and the bullets had already turned the other side of the car into a sieve. "Captain, there are more armed vehicles coming this way. There is less than half a minute left." Falcon Sam hovered at a low altitude of tens of meters, looking at the 2 suppressed people below. He noticed the armed vehicles speeding on the road further away and could not help but shout a warning. "It's really troublesome now." Steve whispered, looked up at the helicarrier that was rising higher and higher, and ordered, "Don't worry about us. You go to the helicarrier first. Natasha and I will be there later." "Okay." Sam nodded, and his mechanical wings trembled slightly. He rushed straight into the sky like a goshawk and quickly flew to the helicarrier a few miles away. However, his departure officially announced that Steve and Natasha were in a situation where they were trapped together. The bullets nearby were still suppressing them, and the enemy's car horn in the distance was close to their ears. Steve leaned against the car, and his mind was quickly thinking about countermeasures. In the end, he sighed in frustration. We may not be able to escape. In the current situation, there was no room for a comeback. Are you giving up, Captain? Next to him, a mechanical voice suddenly sounded. Of course not. Steve answered subconsciously. Suddenly he was stunned. He looked sideways and saw a little robot sitting in the back seat of the car. Steve asked curiously, "Who are you?" "My name is Vice." The little robot showed a row of steel teeth and said, "I was sent by Master Kale to help you. I'm a cheat." Vice a cheat? Steve was a little confused, but when he heard that it was sent by Kale, his face was filled with joy, and he let out a long sigh of relief. If Kale was helping, he would definitely be reliable. There's no time to explain. Get in the car. Vice said coldly. Get in the car? Steve blinked and looked at the abandoned yellow car that was riddled with bullet holes. He forced himself to open the door and sit in the driver's seat. Please fasten your seatbelt. Vice snapped his fingers. His actions and tone were very similar to Kale's. Steve felt that he was in a stolen car, and he could only silently fasten his seatbelt. Vice took out a krypton core from somewhere. He held it with both hands, opened his mouth and swallowed it down. Very good. The power is ready. Prepare to activate the transformation mode. He suddenly jumped into the passenger seat. His body was covered in electric light, and his mechanical hands were used as probes to insert into the driving instrument. Mechanical assimilation. Transformation mode. Outside the abandoned car, the Winter Soldier threw away the empty magazine and the gun with the hot muzzle. Just as he was about to call someone to switch to the rocket launcher, an armed vehicle approached from behind. Stop. Put your hands on your head and squat down. Immediately, a few teams of agents got out of the car and surrounded Natasha, who had just knocked down a few armed men. Natasha snorted coldly. Under the aim of more than 10 guns, she had no choice but to surrender and squat down. Nearly 10 armed vehicles that had arrived stopped and surrounded the abandoned yellow car. Many agents swarmed out of the vehicles and aimed their guns at the car. The captain of the agents warned coldly, "Get out of the car. If you don't get out of the car, we'll shoot." But no one answered. The scene was silent. Just as the captain of the agents couldn't take it anymore, the abandoned car vibrated slightly. The intact taillights lit up and passionate and trendy electronic music floated out of the car. At this moment they were playing music. Dozens of elite agents, Hydra members, and even the Winter Soldier were stunned. Their brains stopped working for a moment. Shoot! The captain of the agents roared angrily. Chapter 286. What is Steve doing? Hearing the music from the car, Natasha, who was handcuffed, felt incredulous. When the captain of the agents gave the order to fire, her expression changed drastically. Bang bang bang. The agents fired in unison, and the bullets formed a dense rain of bullets, covering the small yellow car tightly. At the same time, a white electric current was transmitted from the inside to the outside, covering the damaged car with a sizzling sound. In just a short moment, the small yellow car changed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The front of the car suddenly lifted up, the body of the car mechanically decomposed and expanded, the 4 tires shrunk inwards, and the metal parts stretched out like 4 limbs. It was obviously an ordinary abandoned car, but it displayed a high-tech level of precision deformation, and was quickly reassembled in front of the agent's eyes. Clang clang clang. The bullets landed densely on the shell of the transforming machine, and sparks flew everywhere, leaving only a few light white bullet marks. At this time, the small yellow car finally completed its final transformation. My God, what kind of mechanical monster is this? Alien creature? Robot giant? The agents gasped and raised their heads in shock. They looked up at the huge metallic monster in front of them, and their double scripts could not help but take a few steps back. It was a steel giant standing on 2 legs, and it was more than 8 meters tall. Its hands with muzzles were placed on its waist, and a wing-like engine was spread out from its back. Its shell was still the original yellow paint of the car, and its mechanical eyes were looking around at everyone. What's going on? They were not the only ones who were shocked. Steve, who was sitting in the car seat in the chest of the steel robot, was also dumbfounded. Awesome, right? Vice's proud voice was heard, and it explained, This is the Master's idea, and also a new transformation ability that Tani and I discovered after a long period of learning how to modify armor. With enough energy, it can temporarily assimilate vehicles, helicopters, and other machinery into a part of the body, and then perform a powerful giant transformation. This is the Transformer mode. Weiss explained the theory excitedly. This was also the first time it had performed such a large-scale transformation of armor. Cool. How do we operate it? Are there any weapons? Steve rubbed his palms and asked eagerly. Voice control. As for weapons, there are simple cannons. Weiss raised his left hand as he spoke. There was a cannon on his arm, and the black muzzle was aimed at the vehicles and agents in front of him. Boom! A powerful roar rang out and a laser round was fired out, blasting an armored vehicle into the air. It transformed into a blazing fireball. Several agents around him screamed and fell to the ground with serious injuries. The aftermath of the explosion and the flames wreaked havoc. Gravel and dust flew everywhere. This power. Steve's jaw dropped. Not bad, but it consumes too much energy, Weiss said excitedly. If this cannon was switched to Krypton energy, it would cost more than $10,000. Ordinary people would not be able to afford this burning speed. However, Kale was not short of money. Fire. The captain of the agents roared. Immediately after, another cannon round landed at his feet and blasted his body into ashes. Pieces of flesh and blood splattered everywhere like rain. Explosions are art. Weiss shouted excitedly. He felt that some of his natural instincts had been awakened. Well done. But don't focus on killing the enemy. Save some energy and go save Natasha first. Oh, and don't forget my shield, Steve said calmly. No problem. Weiss nodded in agreement. He ignored all the bullets and covered a distance of 6 to 7 meters with each step. He held the shield in his hand and sped up towards Natasha. Crack. The armored vehicle that was blocking the way was turned into a pile of scrap metal by Weiss's foot. The agents retreated and fled in all directions. Seeing the mechanical monster running towards them, several agents who were holding Natasha fled in fear. The only remaining agent gritted his teeth and raised his gun, roaring as he pulled the trigger to shoot. You overestimate yourself. Weiss sneered. He rushed forward and kicked the agent. The agent immediately flew out like a rubber ball. His body flew in a perfect parabola and he died in the air. He gently grabbed Natasha from the ground and held her together with the shield in his hand. Just as he finished this action, a rocket shot over from the side, hitting the robot's left shoulder and exploding into a ball of fire. Under the power of a modern rocket, the left shoulder of Weiss's giant mechanical body finally cracked open. Damn it. Weiss turned around angrily and saw the Winter Soldier standing on top of an armored vehicle with a rocket launcher 20 meters away. He was looking at them coldly. Baki. Steve was also helpless. He urged, ignore him. Let's hurry to the aircraft carrier. Sam is waiting for us. We won't be able to stop Project Insight if we're late. Okay. Weiss thought for a while and fired 2 shells at the area where the Winter Soldier was. Several armored vehicles were shattered and exploded, turning the road into a raging sea of fire. This greatly affected the pursuit of the agents. Weiss continued to move forward. The earth trembled slightly. After walking on the road, they rushed in the direction of the aircraft carrier. 10 seconds later. In the sea of fire, screams continued. With the heavy roar of the braking engine, a cool black and gold motorcycle accelerated and rushed out. The Winter Soldier's eyes were cold as he locked onto the conspicuous yellow deformation machine. He sped up the motorcycle and chased after it. Until they were far away. An agent took off his burned clothes and withdrew from the sea of fire. After hesitating, he took out his satellite communicator and dialed. On the other side. The director's office of SHELD. The phone on the desk rang, causing Kale and Pierre to look at it. The scene was silent and strange. Pick it up, Kale said. Pierre originally wanted to pick it up. After Kale gave his permission, he quickly picked up the phone and put his hand close to his ear. It's me. The agent didn't hide anything. He eagerly recounted what he had witnessed and encountered earlier. Okay, I got it. Pierce put down the microphone. His originally gloomy face had turned ashen and ugly. It seems that my card won. Kale smiled. After he became a god, his 5 senses were so sharp that no matter how Pierre blocked it, he could hear every word of the conversation at this distance. But even if he didn't listen, he knew the outcome. If the previous steel mode of Weiss was still in an awkward situation where it was inferior to the Iron Man Mark armor, then the current transformer mode was completely on the technological path of its own evolution. There was no need to spend time building it. They only needed to know the structure of the parts, assimilate the cars, fighters, and even interstellar spaceships that they could come into contact with, and use them as materials to transform and shape on the spot. This was the real way of fighting Vice. Chapter 287. With the Vice around, Steve and the others could easily enter the helicarrier. No matter how strong the Winter Soldiers were, they only had two hands. They couldn't stop them from destroying Project Insight. It could be said that the Vice sent by Kale destroyed the original balance of power and completely reversed the battle situation in New York. General. The victory was set. Kale crossed his legs and calmly looked at the pale Pierre in front of him. He asked, "Do you have anything else to say?" "What else do I have to say now? You won again this time." Pierre smiled sadly. After a moment of silence, he adjusted his tie and clothes and said calmly, "But this battle isn't over yet. One of Hydra's heads has been cut off, but a second head will grow. Even if you kill me today and stop Project Insight, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." What he said was the same as Red Skull Schmidt, who was at the end of his road in 1944. This was the strength of the Hydra organization. Pervasive infiltration, the ability to tolerate and steal growth, and the organization's dogma and beliefs that were comparable to brainwashing. "Who said I'm going to kill you? The show isn't over yet." Kale chuckled. His fingers tapped on the table as he said meaningfully, "Don't worry, wait a little longer. There might be a call later." Pierre's pupils constricted when he heard this. An ominous premonition surged in his heart. At this moment, around the world, in some unknown hidden corners, local wars were unfolding. South of Iraq, under the remote mountains, a large base fortress was hidden in the dense forest and was equipped with various high-tech concealment devices. No one had explored this place for decades. It was only today that the technological restriction and the silence of the forest were finally broken. Boom. A black Gold Eagle space warship broke into the forest and fired at the closed fortress door of the large base. Under the attack of the extraterrestrial powerful laser cannon, the protective shield only lasted for half a second before it was on the verge of collapse. Countless Hydra members jumped out in fear, trying to defend and counterattack with firearms and artillery shells. The space warship hovered at a low altitude. The super-advanced metal shell ignored the attacks of modern firearms and blocked the space above the fortress door to unleash its energy cannon fire to its heart's content until the large base was flattened into a sea of fire. How exciting! Her beautiful eyes reflected the fire below. Luna sat in the pilot's seat of the fighter. Her tongue licked her sexy lips, and her hands held the manual device that controlled the fighter's cannon. Yu Tong, who was in the front passenger seat, said softly, "That's enough. Let's change to the next target." "Got it." Luna flicked her beautiful hair and operated the pilot instrument. The fighter stopped and roared into the distance, leaving behind a piece of burnt earth that had suffered a destructive blow. At the bottom of a valley on the outskirts of Austria, there was also a large hidden base here. Along with the subtle sound of an engine and light, an Iron Man wearing high-tech armor entered the sky above this area. "Try this." Tani hovered in the air, and the shells on his shoulders opened. Dozens of small artillery shells spewed out smoke and directly bombarded the top of the base building. There was a rumbling sound, and the fire covered the sky above the fortress. However, after the explosion and smoke dissipated, the building was still standing tall without any damage, and a translucent energy shield was revealed. Seeing this, Tani said in a low voice, "So troublesome. Jarvis, help me find a breakthrough." "Yes, sir," Jarvis answered. However, before it could analyze, a flying creature swept past the Iron Man and flew straight to the fortress building. "That's..." Tani opened his eyes wide. Through the detection instrument, he saw that it was a combination of two strange monsters. A tall black horse with flames under its feet galloped, and a 3-meter-tall green flame giant sat on its back, holding a broken battle axe in its hand. The flaming horse carried hellfire and ran at high speed in the air, leaving a series of flame marks behind. When it reached the sky above Hydra's base, hellfire jumped from the horse's back and fell from the sky, smashing into the energy shield that was strong enough to resist small missiles. As soon as the energy shield met the green flames, it immediately tore a hole, and the steel plate on the top of the building melted with a sizzling sound as it touched the green flames. Hellfire sat straight inside the heavily protected base. Jarvis said leisurely, "Sir, it seems that there's no need to find a breakthrough. Tani was a little confused for a moment and shook his head helplessly. What kind of monsters are in Godfather's family? Let's leave this place to it. Jarvis switched to the next closest target base. Jarvis set up the navigation and quickly sent out a prompt. Sir, the nearest target base probably doesn't need our help. Why, that should also be a large base. Tani was stunned, then suddenly thought of something and asked, Who's there now? Bruce Banner, Jarvis replied. Then forget it. Tani shrunk his neck, and the image of Hulk roaring madly appeared in his mind. He couldn't help but say with lingering fear, switch to the next target base. The German border, about 30 kilometers away from the border town. Jarvis immediately adjusted the navigation and gave the best flight route. Okay, let's fight to our heart's content today. Tani put his arms together and the engines of his palms and feet exploded, breaking through the supersonic speed in an instant and leaving. Hydra's large bases had high-end combat personnel who specialized in solving the problem. At the same time, K2, wearing a black leather jacket and a devil mask, led a team of affiliated family forces and underground organizations to carry out a surprise attack on more small and medium-sized Hydra bases. General Thunderbolt and Colonel Ross did not send out their troops. In order to avoid having too many people in the army, they only issued a one-sided order to temporarily suppress some of the information that was sent to the higher-ups. This made the hidden war in the underground world even more hidden and perfect. Yes, it was perfect. This was a textbook annihilation assault. The Hydra bases, which grew in the dark like tumors on the earth, suffered heavy blows one by one at the same time and quietly fell and were destroyed. HELD headquarters, director's office. From just now to now, in just 10 minutes, more than a dozen phone calls came in. Pierre picked up the phone, listened, hung up, and picked up again, constantly repeating this action. The information that was transmitted to him was, without exception, almost the same. In the end, the phone rang again. Pierre stopped answering, his body slumped in the chair, his eyes were bloodshot, and his lips were tightly pursed. It's okay. Even if Hydra's head is chopped off, it will grow back. Kyle shrugged and comforted him, which was rare of him. Pierre's eyes widened and he almost vomited blood. Chapter 288. One of Hydra's heads was cut off, but this time all 9 heads were cut off. Judging from the phone call he just received, at least half of the bases hidden in the world's underground were attacked by foreign enemies at the same time. The initial estimate was that the losses were unimaginable, and at least tens of thousands of people's lives were wiped out. And the manipulator boss behind the scenes at this moment was sitting in the reception chair in front of him, crossing his legs and watching him make a fool of himself. This was simply too arrogant, too overbearing, too inhumane, too callous and heartless. Pierre's mind was blank, shocked and angry, his body was trembling slightly, and he didn't know how to describe this behavior. Hydra, which had always been good at plotting and doing bad things, would have a day when they were pushed to the ground and bullied. The phone on the desk stopped ringing and then it rang again and there was no sign of it stopping at all. Why aren't you answering the phone? You didn't expect your base to be gone. Kale didn't let go of the opportunity to tease him, and his face was full of surprise. Pierre gritted his teeth and sighed weakly. When did you start the preparations? In the old military base, after the scientist got the address files of many of your bases from the storage device of the Avatar, I had this idea. Kale said and spread out his hands, but at that time it wasn't the best time to attack. The best time was when the aircraft carrier was in the air and Project Insight was launched. I understand. Against a monster like you, we Hydra lost. Pierre immediately understood and smiled bitterly. Once Hydra placed the hope of turning the tables on the aircraft carrier and Project Insight, the defense and vigilance of its own bases would be reduced to the lowest level for a short time. This was a blind spot in common sense. After all, if it was anyone else, they would concentrate their forces to first stop the dangerous Project Insight. Only Kale was so ambitious that he divided the forces he could gather into several parts, only letting Steve and a few others stop the aircraft carrier, and sent other forces to attack the Hydra bases. It doesn't matter. Your Hydra heads will grow back even if they're gone. Kale said with a smile. Can you not talk about my head? Pierre's mouth twitched as he looked at him helplessly. This was originally a slogan, but now it had become a joke. The damage suffered by Hydra this time was comparable to the fiasco during World War II. After the disappearance of Red Skull, Hydra completely withdrew from the world stage and lost the power to threaten the Earth. The remnants hid in the dark for more than half a century and finally made some progress with the help of SHLD. But just as he was about to stand up again, he was beaten back to his original state. The Hydra organization is really going to die this time. The more Pierre thought about it, the more unwilling he became. His face turned red and he finally heaved a long sigh. What a pity. In 1944, no matter what, Schmidt should have gotten rid of you sooner. He should have just dropped a nuclear bomb on the recruit base and buried you in Captain America. Who would have thought that the Hydra organization that caused world panic and infiltrated a wide range of people would be destroyed in the hands of two recruits who were born in the same barracks? Is the Schmidt you're talking about the guy who was chased by me for dozens of kilometers with a long sword? As for the nuclear bomb, I seem to have experienced it personally. Kale smiled indifferently, stood up from the chair, looked down at Pierre and said inexplicably, "Still not giving up? Since you've called them to the door, you might as well call them in." Pierre's face changed and he no longer hesitated. He pressed the invisible button under the table. The mechanism clicked and a crack opened on the smooth ground. Pierre and his chair fell and shrank into the depression. At the same time, gunshots rang out from outside the door. In the blink of an eye, the door of the office was shot into a sieve, and the rain of bullets covered everything in the office, trying to obliterate the creatures inside. Kale snorted coldly, the golden pupils in his eyes flashed, and a nearly transparent golden flame rose from the surface of his body, majestic, sacred, and extremely hot. A heat wave hit. The hot wind blew countless pieces of paper into the air and burned them to ashes. The temperature in the room soared, and the nearby tables and chairs immediately burst into flames. Countless bullets melted into molten iron before they could get within half a meter of Kale, and fell to the floor with a sizzling sound. Stop him. The door shattered and collapsed, and a large group of SHLD agents and armed personnel, armed with all kinds of high-tech and firearms, surged and occupied nearly half of the office area, staring at Kale as if they were facing a great enemy. The only enemy and also the strongest enemy. You overestimate yourself. Kale sneered, knowing that Pierre had sacrificed himself to place these men of sacrifice in his ALD to buy him time to escape. But he didn't care. As long as a member of Hydra appeared today, they would all die. The more the better. Kale ignored the threats of the armed personnel and stepped toward the door. His actions made the expressions of countless people in the room change. Stop right there. The leader shouted in horror. I'll stop. Kale smiled and took a heavy step forward, activating the fire god's power and gravitational traction at the same time. All of you kneel down. The deterrence of the Protoss bloodline belonging to the high-dimensional life form, and the gravitational force field that increased gravity by more than 10 times, seemed to be two unrelated abilities, but when used together, they immediately displayed an unexpected and remarkable effect. Buzz, with Kale as the center, an invisible domineering aura rippled out, and like transparent waves of water, suddenly swept across the surroundings, and everything in the office fell into a temporary standstill in an instant. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. More than a dozen armed men knelt down on the ground, their heads, elbows, and knees heavily pressed against the floor. Their bodies trembled as they bent over, unable to get up, and they let out stuttering, terrified, and wailing. Kale continued to move forward, not even looking at them until he passed by them and left. This was a pressure that was enough to disorder the mind and body, equivalent to his unique personal domain, but this pressure was only effective on ordinary people. Until Kale walked out of the door. A few seconds later, more than a dozen armed personnel collapsed to the ground, sweating profusely, exhausted, and panting heavily, their eyes still full of fear. They were not on the same level. Wait, my back is on fire, someone help me put it out. An armed personnel shouted in panic and the combat suit on his back ignited in flames. He rolled on the floor frantically, but the more he rolled, the more the golden red flames burned until his body turned into a fireball. My clothes are on fire too. Stay away from me, don't come to me. By the time they noticed that there were flames on everyone's body, it was already too late. The golden flames consciously wrapped around the body, and obviously would not be extinguished until the bones were burned. If you want to burn, burn more thoroughly. Kale walked in the corridor, listening to the faint screams and cries behind him, and continued to walk toward the elevator with an expressionless face. This fire had just begun to burn. Chapter 289. HQ. Pierre was obviously forced into a dead end. After learning that his bases had been destroyed, he was so angry that he wanted to cut off all means of retreat. Emergency alert. Kale, the symbol of peace, has invaded SHLD. HQ. He is trying to kill Director Pierre and sabotage Project Insight. All agents are to intercept him at the stairs. All weapons and emergency measures are allowed. I repeat, the target is Kale, the symbol of peace. The alarm in the HQ suddenly sounded and echoed loudly in every corner of the building. It was clearly heard by everyone in the HQ. The technicians and elite agents were shocked. They all stopped what they were doing. Some of them even thought that they had heard wrong. The halls and offices on each floor were silent for a few seconds. Then they started to discuss fiercely. Crazy. Really crazy. This time, the number one enemy SHLD was targeting was the symbol of peace. It was like a son was going to beat his father. Many people felt that their brains were not enough to process what was going on. What are you waiting for? Didn't you hear the order? Hurry up and get moving. Bring your weapons and follow me. Some of the agents didn't hesitate too much. Their actions were swift and decisive. They followed the orders of the alarm and put on their weapons and equipment. They raised their arms and shouted, stirring up the atmosphere as they rushed towards the stairs. Targeting the symbol of peace? What kind of joke is this? A female agent muttered to herself. She looked at the agents who were moving quickly and couldn't help but tighten her grip on the gun in her hand. If the breakup between S.H.I.E.L.D. and Captain America has made many agents suspicious, then the breakup between S.H.I.E.L.D. and Captain America has made many agents suspicious. But now SHLD was going to target the symbol of peace. This completely woke some people up. It was time to choose a side. Should they continue to believe in their superiors, or should they choose to believe in the symbol of peace? This multiple-choice question seemed very weird and funny. However, all New Yorkers had already given the answer a long time ago. The elevator's main gate had been turned off. It couldn't be used normally. Kale didn't care. He directly chose to take the stairs. He started from the 36th floor, which was close to the top, and walked down the stairs step by step. The screams in the director's office were still ringing in his ears. Dense and noisy footsteps came from the stairs in front of him. All of you go. The symbol of peace must be killed. A group of armed agents rushed out of the building and surrounded the staircase. When they saw Kale, they pulled the trigger and fired at him with their rifles. From time to time, there were also smoke bombs, flashing lights, and high-explosive grenades mixed in. Boom. Boom. The headquarters of SHLD seemed to be facing demolition. The entire building was shaking non-stop, and on the top floor, the door and the floor-to-ceiling windows were shattered by the violent shockwaves. Now that Hydra's real base is gone, these Hydra spies disguised as SHLD agents are determined to kill Kale with bloodshot eyes, and regardless of the damage to the SHLD headquarters, they use all their weapons to kill Kale on the spot. They were determined to be ruthless. Some of them even threw high-explosive grenades a few meters away, disregarding the safety of themselves and their teammates. The effect was obvious. The original staircase was directly blown up. Billowing smoke filled the interior space of the top floor, and ashes symbolizing death sprinkled down. The surviving agents who launched the attack put on protective headgear, feeling uneasy, and began to scan with the infrared line equipped with firearms. The target is gone. Is he dead? How is that possible? The opponent is... Their conversation stopped abruptly. In the corridor filled with thick black smoke, a dark and tall humanoid figure gradually emerged. The narrow red eyes glowed faintly, filled with inhuman emotions such as brutality, killing, coldness, and wildness. Venom fully covered. A bunch of trash, you want to kill me like this? The dark demon made a hoarse voice, grinned slightly, and took a big step forward. The wild and tall dark body brought an extraordinary impact to people's vision. The agents gasped, a chill ran down their spines, and their hands holding the guns trembled. Demon, it's that demon. One of the agents said in horror. In the data files of the Hydra organization, there was a description of the reasons for the fiasco of World War II. Among them, there was a record of the number one enemy, Kale. During the night of the battle, that man would transform into a black demon with an immortal body and wings. His strength and speed were far beyond that of ordinary people. He was a monster that could only give up on resisting. Monster, go to hell. Shrouded in the fog of fear, someone in the group of agents couldn't help but shout. Then a high-explosive grenade was thrown out, smashing directly into the dark demon's face. Kale didn't dodge. He opened his ferocious mouth, and under the incredulous eyes of the agents, he bit down on the incoming high-explosive grenade. Boom. The powerful explosion exploded in his mouth. Kale smacked his mouth, unharmed, and puffed out a few rings of black smoke. Monster, this is a real monster. The agents who witnessed this scene were desperate and their fighting spirit was gone. Driven by the fear in their hearts, they threw away their guns and turned to escape downstairs. Where do you think you're going? All of you stay here. Kyle grinned maliciously. A wave of pressure rose from his body, exploding outwards in a substantial manner. The agents who were still within a 10-meter radius felt as if their legs were filled with lead. They staggered forward and fell to the ground. Once they lowered their heads, they could no longer raise them. Die. Kale strode forward, and from his tall and strong body, several dark and tough tentacles shot out like bullets. The tentacles pierced the heads of the agents in an instant, and their bodies were strung together. Kale pulled the tentacles and dragged the corpses down the broken stairs, leaving behind rows of blood-stained steps. On the lower floors, a new team of agents poured out, and a new round of fighting began. Kale didn't refuse any of them. From the top of the building to the bottom, the corpses were strung together with a tentacle as a long rope. On the 36 floors, there was a local battle on almost every floor, but they all came to an end in a short period of time. Until they arrived downstairs. The main hall on the first floor was quiet. When Kale walked out of the stairs, he looked up and saw nearly 100 agents standing in place. These agents didn't have the slightest intention to fight. After seeing Kale covered in venom, they hurriedly bowed and saluted, respectfully greeting him and saying, "Hello, Chief Consultant." Chief Consultant? Kale was slightly taken aback and suddenly remembered that during World War II, when he first built this HLD, he created the nominal duty of Chief Consultant of HLD to avoid trouble. Your reaction is quite fast, otherwise I would have killed them all as Hydra spies. Kale glanced around the hall, and under the murderous gaze of his red eyes, the agents on the field bowed their heads in fear. I'll leave these to you. I'll go after Alexander Pierre of the Hydra organization. Kale ordered, his left hand swung forward, and the end of the tentacle dragged out a pile of corpses from the staircase. There were also nearly 100 special agents in combat suits. Their chests and heads were tied together with holes. Blood was still dripping from the wounds. Chapter 290. HLD headquarters. The main hall of the building was dead silent. There was only the creepy rustling sound of hair, muscles, and bones rubbing against the floor. There was also the dripping sound of blood flowing down the stairs. The agents on the scene were all pale. They were too shocked to speak. Some of the researchers immediately bent over and vomited. How could they describe the scene in front of them? It would be too simple to call it a massacre. Hundreds of corpses that had not yet fully stiffened were tied together by tentacles as if they were chickens and ducks. They were pulled from the 36th floor all the way to the first floor. Blood washed the HLD headquarters. The entire building was dyed blood red. It was filled with the disgusting smell of blood. No matter what the reason was, this was an inhumane massacre. If there was a video of it and it was released, it would undoubtedly cause great panic in the civilized society. What's more, the one who did it was a legendary hero who was promoted as a symbol of peace, who loved and defended peace. If he was not careful, Kale might even lose his reputation in this battle and bear the infamy of a ruthless butcher. Kale obviously thought of this, but he did not take it to heart. HLD agents? So what if he killed them? He did not need to give anyone an explanation. Where's Alexander Pierre? Kyle had yet to recover from being completely covered by the venom. He opened his mouth ferociously, exhaling hot air as he coldly asked. An agent as a representative shuddered and quickly replied. After the director hurried downstairs and issued the arrest warrant, he left in a helicopter. He said that he would personally board the aircraft carrier to complete the Insight plan. Okay, I'll go kill him now. Kale whispered. He did not care about the feelings of others. He twitched and pulled back the dark tentacles covered in blood, leaving behind a pile of broken corpses with fatal wounds. That's right. From now on, Alexander Pierre is no longer the director of HLD. Also, there must be a Hydra spy among you people. From now on, no one is allowed to leave the headquarters. Kale said one last sentence as he walked out of the door. Wide and long dark wings covered in scales spread out from his back. He squatted down slightly and his legs were like taut springs. With one leap he leaped more than 20 meters. When he reached the highest point, Kale flapped his wings and a hurricane exploded in the air. His tall body turned into a black stream of light, and circles of white waves appeared on the ground. He flew toward the aircraft carrier at supersonic speed. After Kale left, the fog of fear that shrouded the headquarters of SHLD finally dispersed. Countless people on the first floor heaved a sigh of relief as they stared at the pile of corpses in the middle of the main hall with lingering fear. "Is that murderous monster really a symbol of peace?" someone asked with a trembling voice. The agents all fell silent. Of course, it was a symbol of peace, but who would dare to blame this inhumane slaughter on the legendary heroes? Wasn't this a complete breakdown of his image? There is no doubt that it is the symbol of peace, Kale, the hero who stopped Hydra and accelerated the end of World War II. A weak but steady voice suddenly sounded from the door of the building. Everyone looked toward the source of the voice and saw a female agent pushing a metal wheelchair into the hall. On the wheelchair was a middle-aged black man with a bald head and bandages all over his body. His dark and ferocious face was majestic. XX Director, Mr. Nick Fry. The agents were pleasantly surprised and quickly bowed in unison. "Greetings, ex-director. Alright, this farce should be over." Fry scanned the messy hall with his single eye, and looked at the tragic corpses. He sighed and said, "I can testify that Project Insight is a conspiracy that caused a catastrophe in the human world. Alexander Pierre is a Hydra spy. Captain Steve and Deputy Director Natasha are innocent. More than half of SHLD are infiltrated by Hydra spies." As soon as he finished speaking, the agents were horrified. They put their hands on the handles of their guns and vigilantly guarded against the agents around them. But even if that's the case, Kyle's heroic actions are too. A researcher collapsed on the ground and vomited. Even though he knew the truth, he still couldn't accept the fact that Kyle had carried out such a cruel massacre without even verifying his identity. Whether you accept it or not, this is Kale's modus operandi. Using violence to curb violence. Fry shook his head and said, "Otherwise, how do you think he got his title as the symbol of peace? Did he get it by reasoning with his enemies? This is a legendary throne built by piling up corpses." This was the biggest reason why he had been hesitant and didn't want Kale to solve the internal conflict in SHLD. Fry knew Kale very well. He had no worries. As long as one stood on the opposite side of him, regardless of whether one's identity was good or bad, one would welcome the end of destruction. His killing intent was very pure. Most of the time he didn't kill people out of emotion. It was like opening the lid of a can. He would open it simply because he wanted to drink the drink inside. He was the one who had the least baggage of a hero. He did what he wanted and did what he wanted. He didn't care about what other people thought of him. He never thought of himself as the so-called symbol of peace. He never thought about laws, morals, human nature, and so on. He didn't need to think about them. He would only do what he thought was right. This was Kale, the lawless and legendary hero. The hall fell into silence again. Some of the agents had some understanding in their eyes. The height that Kale stood at could no longer be considered a superhero. He was more like an emotionless god. When he dealt with the wrong things on Earth, he would completely erase and change them. Many people couldn't accept such cruel methods. Everything that happened in SHLD today is classified as top secret. No one is allowed to leak it. Starting from the source code, delete all the footage from today's floor and format it. Fry said with a cold face. Kale didn't care, but that didn't mean that he didn't care. Fry continued, "Also, everyone put down their weapons. No one is allowed to hold weapons until the battle over at the helicarrier is over." Since they had already come to this point, they would wash SHLD clean with blood. They would burn it back to its original appearance, free of impurities and pollution. 1,000 meters above the center of New York City. 3 helicarriers formed a triangle. They were 50 meters apart and hovered in the air. It was a bit like 3 steel islands floating in the ocean. At this moment, a fierce chase was taking place on the top deck of one of the helicarriers. A huge yellow transforming robot was running for its life with Natasha in its hand. More than a dozen single fighter jets buzzed like bees out of a hive. They chased after the giant robot relentlessly. "Come and catch me. If you catch me, I'll let you." As the Vice ran, it turned its head and used a loudspeaker to issue a powerful group taunt. "You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.